What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto unlocks chakra chains in Wave? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. At the bridge in Nami no Kuni, Land of Waves, Team Kakashi was currently facing their second true life or death fight as shinobi. As Sakura desperately tried to defend the bridge builder Tsunade, and silently prayed for her teammate's success, her teacher Hitaki Kakashi, the infamous copy ninja, was battling the Kirigakure no Kijin, demon of the hidden mist, Momochi Zabuza. They battled in ninjutsu, taijutsu and kenjutsu, and found themselves evenly matched. The most intriguing fight, however, was that between Haku, a descendant of Kirigakure's Yuki clan, and Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto. Haku's use of Hyaten, ice release, ninjutsu was too much for Sasuke and Naruto to bear, and both were riddled with senbon. Their movements were becoming progressively more sluggish, and Naruto was currently only semi-conscious on the ground, having received blows to multiple pressure points that would normally render a shinobi catatonic. Fortunately, as both a Jinchuriki and an unknowing descendant of the Uzumaki clan, Naruto was highly resilient to such attacks. The Fo-Oinen, Hunter Nin, was positioned within his Makio Hyosho, demonic mirroring ice crystals, senbon at the ready to launch at his foes. He watched as the raven-haired one scanned the mirrors attentively, searching for any indicator as to which held the original, and where the next attack may come from. "You move well?" Haku commented, both pleasing and confusing Sasuke with the hint of admiration in the voice. Regardless, the Hyaten user continued, "This time I'll stop you. Your body, reflexes, ability to react, you should already be at your limit." Haku thought as he prepared more senbon for another barrage. He noted that the kind boy he met mere days earlier in a clearing rose also, standing himself beside his comrade. "He's coming," he heard the orange-clad shinobi exclaim, and the Yuki once again found himself questioning how exactly the blonde-haired boy passed whatever examination was required for promotion to Jonin in Konoha. "Shush," the raven hissed lowly, as both drew a kunai. "Calm down, concentrate and see through it, Usuratankachi." Naruto nodded and both trained their eyes on the mirrors in preparation for the next barrage, ignoring their own beaten, bloodied forms. As Haku launched the senbon, both boys dodged to the right at the last moment, the blonde being nicked slightly but otherwise free of any newly acquired injuries. "They saw it? No way!" The Fo-Oinen internally protested, shocked and confused at the pair's reaction. As the two lifted their faces, Haku found himself gazing into the eyes of the Sharingan. Or rather, to be more accurate, two sets of Sharingan, one with a collective 3 tomo, and the other with 2 between them. Those eyes, it can't be the Sharingan? Naruto was confused as to how he could suddenly see so easily, and looked over to Sasuke, only to gasp. "Sasuke, you have eyes like Kakashi-sensei's," Naruto exclaimed, completely unaware of the change in his own eyes, bar the noticeable increase in the clarity of his vision. The blonde Uzumaki saw his teammate turn his head with a smirk, only for aforementioned Uchiha to stop dead and do a double take. How? Sasuke thought in shock, completely unsure as to how he should react in this situation. Suddenly, he was snapped out of his shock by the voice of their enemy, which was really starting to get on his nerves. "Ah, so you two are also bearers of an advanced bloodline. No matter," the androgynous figure trailed off as he launched the senbon, Naruto being caught by several more due to a moment of confusion regarding the figure's words. Sasuke, meanwhile, managed to dodge. "How does the Dobi have the Sharingan? Don't tell me he's family?" Sasuke wondered. The idea seemed foreign to the last Uchiha, not so last, now, he mused idly. After spending so many years of his life alone, knowing that the only living family he could have now, Itachi, does not count. He will never count, not again, his mind insisted, would be those he fathered and raised himself. And, honestly, that was a little further down on his priorities list right now. Killing the bastard came first. But maybe he wouldn't be as alone as he thought, now. What did he mean, 2 of us? I'm not. Naruto wondered in confusion as his body gave out momentarily from the damage sustained once again. He heard the figure speak again, and his eyes widened in panic as he saw the figure race out of the mirror directly across from him and hurl senbon at him, most likely to strike him in the eyes, an instant kill. Sasuke, with his Sharingan active, was having similar thoughts. As time seemed to slow down, he ran for Naruto as the masked figure shot at the blonde-haired Uchiha? Perhaps? Regardless, Sasuke had only just gotten some form of family back, and he'd be damned if he lost it this quickly. Naruto? Damn, make it in time. Running to intercept the attack, Sasuke was left with little option but to throw himself between the oncoming attack and his teammate. Holding a hand against his bleeding chest wound, Kakashi panted as he stared at Zabuza, slightly panicked. Kakashi-sensei," Sakura exclaimed in horror as Tsunade watched on with terrified eyes. Seeing the figure of a mildly bloodied Zabuza not meters away from her, Sakura couldn't help but feel weak at the knees as panic struck her. The visage of the Kirigakure no Kijin was truly living up to its moniker, or at least, in her mind, anyway. "You were too late, Kakashi?" Zabuza mocked in his raspy voice which sent cold shivers down their spines. "Did your desire to save these brats cloud your mind and make this mist thicken further?" he idly wondered, smirking at the fear he invoked in his foes. "Even with that impressive eye, your ability to read my movements is dimming." Zabuza trailed off, once more fixing his voice in a mocking drawl. He, let me enjoy this more, Kakashi, I want more fun as I return the favor." "Don't worry about yours brats. Haku has probably already killed them," Zabuza commented, sadistic mirth twinkling in his eyes as he saw Kakashi's jaw tighten beneath the man's mask. "Oh, don't worry, Hitaki. I'm sending you to the same place they're going, so you'll get to apologize for being too weak to protect them." His last words were a shout, leaving the three to stare in shock at the sickening thirst for blood shining in the man's slightly manic eyes. Sakura, in her anger at the man's words, drew unnecessary attention to herself. "No way," she shrieked. "Sasuke-kun won't be defeated by a guy like that so easily." "Same for Naruto," she continued as her inner self shouted its agreement. "Exactly," Kakashi agreed, shocking Zabuza with the certainty in his voice. "I believe in their strength," the copy ninja continued with a solid stare at the demon, daring the man to disagree. Naruto's unshakable determination and drive, and Sasuke's heritage as the last of one of Konoha's most prominent clans. Zabuza stiffened in shock. Remembering the time he saw the boy, he realized he may have made a fatal mistake in sending Haku against the Raven. "You mean," he trailed off uncertainly, rather worried about the conclusions his mind was making. Of course he'd heard of the single survivor. "Yes," Kakashi affirmed, "his name is Uchiha Sasuke, a genius ninja with the Kekkei Genkei of the Uchiha clan running through his veins. An offspring of that tragic clan." Zabuza halted, realizing things he should have seen sooner. "Kami dammit, no wonder he's been progressing so quickly," he continued his train of thought as he made hand signs. "But that's the same case as Haku, then. There's never been a case of the Makio Hyosho failing," Zabuza announced as he vanished into the mist once more. "He disappeared again," Sakura exclaimed, stating the obvious. Kakashi resisted the urge to roll his eyes and inwardly promised to introduce Team 7's lone kunoichi to his friend Kurenai. Or maybe Anko. "Right, not the time. Sakura, stay here. It's about time I finished this fight," Kakashi ordered as he bounded out into the mist, not even bothering to listen to his student's reply. He vaguely saw what he thought to be the outline of Zabuza through the mist and spoke up. "You seem to think I survived in the shinobi system with naught but my Sharingan, Zabuza. But, I am afraid I'm a former, trained member of the Ansatsu Senjutsu Tokushu Butai, Special Assassination and Tactical Squad. 1. So I'll show you the ninja I used to be. Instead of copying jutsu, I'll show you my own," Kakashi declared with certainty, inwardly hoping that his genin were faring well against their foe, and deciding that they would all need to get some training done once this mission was over. Naruto stared in shock at the scene before him, a startling clarity to it as the reality he knew crumbled. In front of him, Sasuke stood slumped forwardly slightly, his body ridden with senbon, panting heavily. Across from them, Haku was collapsed on the ground in pain, having borne the brunt of Sasuke's counterattack. "Tch, Dobi. You're always getting in the way," Sasuke remarked as he slumped backward slightly, Naruto catching his body as it fell, staring in shock at the blood and the sheer number of sharp, pointy implements sticking out of the last Uchiha's downed form. "Sasuke, you? Why What's with that face, you moron? Sasuke smirked weakly as Naruto gaped at the raven, uncomprehending of how events escalated to this point. Why would he save me? Naruto wondered. PFT, I hated you. Sasuke continued hoarsely, feeling his body giving way to the blood loss and poison on the senbon. But, Naruto trailed off weakly, until his anger spiked. Why? I never asked for your help, Teme. Naruto raged, refusing to accept this despite the fact that he could feel it being burned into his memory, forevermore. I don't know? Sasuke trailed off uneasily, his face scrunched up in the very epitome of pain. My body moved on its own, he continued, as Naruto watched in shock. Idiot? He paused a moment and then, that man. My brother, I swore I wouldn't die until I killed him. But now, you're here. Avenge our clan, for me, please, he coughed up blood, chuckling weakly. You better attain your dream, Dobi? And with that, Uchiha Sasuke died. He landed a heavy blow on me, and died for you without even flinching. He is truly strong, to protect his precious person in such a way, Haku commented as he rose. He is a shinobi that truly deserves respect. He finished, staring at the body of the Uchiha in his kin's arms. Is this the first time you have lost a close friend? This is the way of the shinobi, Haku proclaimed as he prepared to send another hail of senbon and end the fight, stepping back into the mirrors. Shut up, Naruto exclaimed quietly, his body exuding extreme killing intent as he rose slowly, his arms still cradling the dead Uchiha. Guilt churned deep in his gut, a soul-deep anguish haunting him. A dull ache crept into his eyes. Hatred bubbled, spat and boiled, and he wanted nothing more than to scream. To make the world, to make his enemies, feel pain. This was his fault. If only he'd been faster, better, stronger. I hated you, too, he thought quietly. Suddenly, the ache in his eyes turned to sharp, burning, blinding pain, and he finally let loose a resounding cry of rage and anguish. Kakashi, Zabuza, Sakura and Tsunade's attention turned in the direction of the ice dome as an inhuman scream tore through the previous quiet, and a heavy killing intent leaked into the area. Sakura took a step backwards, quaking in fear as Tsunade fell to the ground, barely refraining from soiling himself. Kakashi and Zabuza began to sweat and gaze in the direction of the battle between their respective students. What is this? Zabuza thought, having flashbacks to the time he attempted to depose the Yondaime Mizukage, Yagura, the Sanbi Jinchuriki. Images settled in his mind, of the blonde, whiskered boy, and the tales of the legendary Kyuubi. Wait, no, surely not, that child cannot be. Kakashi, meanwhile was panicking. If this was what he thought it was, no, there was no doubt about it. The seal was either weakening, or it had broken completely. What could have evoked such a reaction from Naruto? He wondered, as both he and Zabuza raced to the ice dome, their mutual animosity temporarily ignored. Within the Hake no Fuin Shiki, 8 trigram ceiling style, the Kyuubi opened its eyes after taking a month-long nap, chuckling darkly as it felt an increase in the amount of chakra its host was drawing from the seal. It had been watching over the years as the host had absorbed its chakra from the seal the brat's father had placed before his death. The Gaki was pathetic, and now the Biju could finally act on its plan to not only gain its host's favor, but also to up the host's power, and come one step closer to escaping the damned seal. After all, what it was about to do could damage the seal nigh irreparably, and without the key to the seal, the Gaki couldn't do anything about it. Even then, making amendments to Uzumaki seals was finicky business, best left to the experts, the Uzumaki themselves. In the meantime, as much as the Biju hated to admit it, the ninjin was effectively its representation in the world, meaning that the mortal had to seem the part. After all, to the shinobi of the elemental nations, the Jinchuriki was the incarnation of the beast in human form. And the Kyuubi would be damned if this ninjin made it look weak. Sending a surge of chakra through the boy's body after collecting it from where it had lain before, attached to his very being like a disgusting stain that it couldn't quite purge, until now, the Kyuubi smirked slightly. Oh, sure, it was possible that the surge may do irreparable damage to the host body, but then the ninjin of that village would simply extract the Biju and place him inside another vessel, allowing the whole process to begin again. And the Kyuubi had nothing, if not time. Although it doubted any lasting harm would eventuate, after all, the boy was a distant descendant of him, not that the Gaki could ever compare. As the strongest Biju finished sending the surge of chakra, it suddenly felt a familiar type of chakra, one that left a certain identifying footprint that the Kyuubi hadn't felt for 12 years. Its eyes widened significantly when it became aware of events outside the seal once more, and it realized just how much of a mistake it may have made. This is not good, the Biju mused. The Fo-Oinen watched in horror as the blonde's head rose to show the spinning Sharingan in his eyes, which slowly morphed into a different form of Sharingan. Each Tomo, now fully matured, he idly noted, extended in opposite directions, starting at a sharp point that originated from the center of the eye, the pupil of which had remained black, and extended outwards in curves of black, each forming a sort of brace, of which there were 3 placed at equal intervals around the eye. 2. Suddenly, the boy's body became awash in incredibly foul chakra, bubbling red and leaking ill intent. Then, just as suddenly, the chakra receded, and countless spear points emerged all along the boy's upper body, pointing in all directions around him. What on earth? Haku thought, stunned, before his thoughts were silenced forever as the spear points all shot forward on chains, embedding themselves in anything around the blonde, and impaling themselves throughout multiple points in Haku's body. As the mirrors shattered and the chakra chains receded, Naruto gazed out on the mist with red and black eyes before slumping forward into unconsciousness. Hitaki Kakashi graduated the Konoha Shinobi Academy at the age of 5, and was promoted to the rank of Chunin at age 6. He was later demoted, a blight on his record that he would never admit to, even in the face of death, and was re-promoted after spending some time under the command of Namikaze Minato. He made Jonin at age 13, Anbu at age 15, and Anbu captain not long after that. He'd like to say that he'd become impervious to shock, confusion, and other such frivolous emotions, due to the harsh life he had lived as one of Konohagakure's elite. However, as it stood, he could positively say he was totally, completely, utterly flabbergasted. And he would never admit that aloud. Ever. When he sensed the sudden increase in killing intent and chakra, he had immediately feared the worst. After all, Minato-sensei taught that it is best to prepare for the worst, and hope for the best. As it stood, he immediately recalled the last time he had felt this particular chakra, on that night 12 years ago when he lost his last 2 precious people, Kushina-sama, Minato-sensei. He thought forlornly, and immediately prepared to dash in, extract Sasuke, and hightail it out of there, mission be damned. But then, as he and Zabuza had appeared outside the Makio Hyosho, demonic mirroring ice crystals, both peered inside to see the form of Naruto standing over Sasuke's limp form as spearheads emerged from the boy's body. In an instant, the sound of rattling chains and shattering mirrors announced to the world the death of one of the last of the Yuki clan. Death by impalement on flying chains made out of chakra, to boot. How embarrassing. Kakashi, for his part, survived the sudden bombardment of sharp, pointy implements, courtesy of his blonde-haired student, due to instinct and hard-trained reflex alone. His mind was reeling when he saw the golden Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains, extending outwards from where the dome of ice once stood, and he recalled the last time he saw those chains. Kushina-sama had said that they were a rare bloodline of the Uzumaki, awoken only once every few generations, and to see 2 wielders in any single lifetime was exceedingly rare. Kakashi's mind was abuzz with questions. Had the bloodline been adapting, and was now available to each generation? Was it something in Minato-sensei's genes that brought out the latent skill? Did Kushina-sama only unlock the ability due to her amazing chakra? Was it just a random fluke of genetics? Or, perhaps the scariest thought of all, but also the most confusing. Is this the work of the Kyuubi? Momochi Zabuza was afraid of very few things, a consequence of the life he'd lived as the Kirigakure no Kijin. Indeed, he could count on one hand the number of things he was truly scared of, and even then, he'd have a digit to spare. Yagura, the kid was a psycho. And regardless of what the Yondaime Mizukage said, Zabuza would, to his dying day, insist that the little bastard was still a teenager. Biju. Pretty reasonable, given the fact that he'd fought Yagura. Besides that, he'd witnessed the carnage that Jinchuriki and their Biju were capable of unleashing on the battlefield. It made ordinary shinobi look like children. Children playing at the games of the triad. Okawa-sama. Zabuza gave an involuntary shudder every time he thought of that woman. The sheer pride in her eyes after he slaughtered that entire graduating class still haunted him in his nightmares. She was, well, it's best just said that she ranked above the Biju for a very good reason. At least he knew where he got it from. Last, but not least, was the most terrifying individual he had ever met. A woman whose very existence struck fear in the hearts of Kiri nin to this very day. Some parents even told stories to their children, of how the devil woman who moved with unequaled stealth and grace would come into their homes and teach them the meaning of fear and pain if they didn't do what they were told, and eat all their vegetables. Uzumaki Kushina, more commonly known as Konoha no Kusari Taikiyatsu, chain cyclone of the leaf. The very embodiment of the three things that made an Uzumaki deadly: swords, stealth, and seals. He'd met her once, on the battlefield. Of course, he was just a young boy back then, barely beginning his teenage years and still not quite on the level of the Kiri no Shinobigatana Shichinin Shu, 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. Not that their power did them any good in the long run, since they lost 2 members to that woman alone during the war. She wasn't overly skilled in the ninjutsu department, but her fuinjutsu, kenjutsu and stealth were nigh on unmatched. She personally led the battlefront between Kirigakure and Konohagakure during the Third Shinobi World War, a masked figure whose identity remained largely unknown. Her rumored lover, the man who went on to become Konoha's Yondaime Hokage, had led the charge against Kumo. They were a match made in heaven for Konoha, and it was widely acknowledged that, if the two had ever raised an heir together, the child may very well have been the next Shinobi no Kami, god of shinobi. He remembered the battle that made history in Kirigakure, the day that a masked woman with blood-red hair led the forces of Konoha to battle, in a final conflict that signified the end of Kirigakure's involvement in the Third Shinobi World War. Akarikuho no Tatakai, Battle of the Bloodied Shore. The battle turned upscale when the Rokubi Jinchuriki was ordered to release the Biju she contained on the Konoha shinobi, after which Uzumaki Kushina restrained the Biju with her chains made of solid chakra. The Kusari Taikiyatsu was known for her tough-mindedness on the battlefield, and her unshakable resolve to defend her home. Factor in the knowledge that Kirigakure played no small part in the decimation of her clan's home village and, well, it was a massacre. No other words could describe it. Zabuza himself only survived by playing dead, hiding under a dead body, and later claiming he had been knocked unconscious, or risk incurring the Sandaime Mizukage's wrath. Due to their loss of the Sanbi in an earlier incident not months before, the Mizukage was left with no other option than to offer Konohagakure their unconditional surrender, and cessation from the war itself, alongside some other concessions. In exchange, they got the 2 swords of the swordsman that they'd lost back, and they got to keep their Biju. Joy. So, when he saw the Kongo Fusa, his primal instinct to survive outweighed anything else. Jumping back at the last moment to dodge and inwardly worrying over what happened to Haku, he released his Kirigakure no Jutsu, hiding in mist technique. The mist cleared, and Zabuza saw the slumped form of the blonde Kushina spawn, for what else could he be, with that infernal chakra? Next to the Gaki's downed Uchiha teammate. Across from them was the bloody mangled form of Zabuza's breath hitched. Haku. As Zabuza made his way to what little remained of his once apprentice, Kakashi's pinkette Jonin screamed. Haruno's Sakura was sheltered, really. She had lived a quiet childhood, with no major familial deaths, no horrible fights with her parents, and no run-ins with bullies after she'd managed to get into the academy, in crowd. Her mother was a Chunin-level kunoichi working in Konoha's cipher division, and her father retired from the shinobi trade and opened a shop after realizing he may very well become a career genin at the rate he was going. She honestly wasn't overly bothered with a true career as kunoichi, much preferring the civilian lifestyle. But alas, she simply had to remain a kunoichi of Konohagakure, or she'd lose her shot at Sasuke-kun. And she couldn't have that. No, not at all. She knew that she should have taken her training more seriously. Done more than fixate on her appearance and attractiveness, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Every time her parents suggested that she go and train, or eat more, or do something healthier, she had wholeheartedly refused. And it had really come back to bite her in the ass. When she heard the rustling of chains and what suspiciously sounded like shattering glass, she was confused. What in the name of hell had done that? Then, she noticed that the mist was clearing slowly and she immediately tried to see the weird dome of ice that the strange figure with the mask had made earlier. The one that Naruto had run inside without a second thought. TCH, moron, she thought. Cha, that fool is going to get in Sasuke-kun's way, Shanaru, her inner self raged. When Sakura saw that the ice thingy was gone, she was about to give a shout of joy, realizing her love had vanquished the foe Oinen. Alas, that was not to be. No, instead, she saw the crumpled, bloody forms of Zabuza's subordinate, Uzumaki Naruto and Uchiha Sasu. Sakura screamed, "No, that's not possible." Her mind bellowed, refusing to believe the sight before her was real. It's just a genjutsu. That's it. Just a. Her inner self was conspicuously silent. Sakura's mind tracked back to the academy lessons on genjutsu. Raising her hands into a seal and not even noticing the forms of both Zabuza and Kakashi walking over to their respective students, she immediately expelled chakra from her body and shouted, "Kai! Release," at the top of her lungs. Mentally preparing herself to see the actual goings-on beneath the illusion, Sakura was immediately confused as to why the genjutsu had not yet lifted. But, she stuttered aloud, unsure how to deal with this, until her mind flashed back to the lessons on genjutsu once again, and she realized where she'd gone wrong. High-level genjutsu sometimes require other stimuli to be introduced, in order for escape to be possible. She remembered that lesson, and remembered what to do, extracting a kunai from her pouch and immediately stabbing it into the tip of her right index finger. Nothing happened. Trying again on her wrist, Sakura drove the kunai across the previously delicate skin, trying desperately to prove that everything she was seeing was a genjutsu. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real, her mind repeated, a mantra that she would happily continue to her dying day. She didn't even notice Kakashi's sigh of relief as he detected a weak pulse in both Sasuke and Naruto's forms, or the flicker of grief that alit in Zabuza's eyes. She was too busy trying to prove that this wasn't real. By the time she'd made several cuts across her wrist with a kunai in a vain effort to disprove reality, she was becoming truly desperate. When she felt a hand wrap around the wrist on her kunai-wielding hand, she looked up into the saddened eyes of their client. The emotions dancing in Tsunade's eyes, sadness, pity, sympathy, were too much for the girl to handle, and she finally came to realize that everything she was seeing was not a genjutsu. Genjutsu could not possibly manage to reflect the emotions in those eyes so well. And then, with that realization, came horror. And she screamed again, louder, and maybe, just maybe, there were some tears mixed in for both of her teammates. It was at that moment, in her grief, that Haruno Sakura stared at her bloodied wrist as she screamed, and swore to herself that she would get stronger to avenge her teammates, and never fail anyone else so significantly ever again. When Gato and his goons approached the bridge, they had expected any one of a number of different scenarios. Best case scenario? The ninja had all killed each other off in a single, bloody conflict and the bridge builder, who they honestly forgot the name of, was caught in the crossfire. Worst case scenario? The ninja were all still alive, still fighting and the bridge builder was unharmed. If that was so, all they had to do was run in, axes swinging, and slaughter the fools while they were unawares. Honestly, how strong could a ninja be, really? The one thing that none of their number had expected was to see a bunch of slumped over, bloodied forms that might have been kids, and the bridge builder alongside both adult shinobi staring at aforementioned bodies as some small girl with pink hair screamed her head off like a banshee. That also happened to be exactly what was actually going on at the bridge. "Oi, we got ourselves a screamer, lads," one of the more depraved individuals amongst the thugs called, and his fellows either wolf whistled or grinned lecherously. Their actions were halted, however, when Gato held up a hand. As it stood, this proved to be more than enough sound to gain the attention of the shinobi present, and Gato stepped forward to speak. Identifying the most bloodied of the three forms as that of Zabuza's subordinate, Gato grinned and went to kick the corpse. His leg was caught by Zabuza mid-swing. As the slimy businessman lost his footing and fell backwards, Zabuza spoke. "What, pray tell, are you doing here, Gato?" The voice of the man was sickly sweet. Or at least as sickly sweet as the man could sound, given the fact he normally spoke in a rather hoarse, grating drawl. As he applied more pressure to the ankle of his employer, thoroughly enjoying the manner in which the sleazy little man swallowed nervously. "Hey, unhand the boss." One of the more stupid in the encroaching crowd of morons, For really, who would take on a shinobi with civilian-level skills? Demanded as he broke into a run towards Zabuza. Before he even got close to Zabuza, he met his end via kunai to the brain, courtesy of one Hitaki Kakashi. Truce? The copy ninja requested of his companion, silently hoping that the man had put two and two together, looked underneath, and seen that he was about to be double-crossed. Just as Zabuza was about to reply, a particularly over-muscled thug interrupted them. "This isn't any of your business, Konoha nin," the brutish man exclaimed, not looking fazed in the slightest by the death of his comrade. Kakashi doubted any of these fools even knew the dead one's name. "We're just gonna double-cross the guy and kill him. You can take your precious kitties and sod off." Evidently, this goon was equally as idiotic, if not more so, in fact, as the one whose body still lay between Gato's cronies and the two shinobi. "Shut up, you fools," Gato demanded, sweating profusely and staring up at the visage of the Kirigakure no Kijin with no small amount of fear. Zabuza put an end to that, quickly and efficiently inserting his kunai through the smaller man's jaw and pushing it upwards. As the taller ninja once again stood fully upright, Kabikirabocho resting on his shoulder as he glared at the thugs, he released much of his remaining chakra from his body in waves. The visage of a demon appearing behind him, giving more credence to his moniker. As the thugs each took a step back in fear, Kakashi turned an eye smile on them. "I suppose it would be too much to ask you to simply leave?" the silver-haired nin inquired, his form appearing just as terrifying as his companions to the cronies of the, now deceased, Gato. When none of the thugs was forthcoming with a response, Kakashi reached his own conclusion. "Ah, that's a shame, shall we get to it, then, Zabuza-san?" One of the few men to ever fight the Yondaime Mizukage and live turned to face the copy ninja of Konoha, and grinned. And then, there was a massacre. He had been ignored. In fact, that was the very reason he existed. To be ignored, that is. And it hurt. Oh Kami, did it hurt. He knew the original didn't like him. Wouldn't like him, and in fact the other didn't even know he existed. He was the real them. The other was an imposter, just a weak mask that didn't show what was hidden deep inside. He was born to protect them both, and to protect the world. To protect everything from himself. The irony was not lost on him, that was for sure. But, even though he resented it, which he could do nothing but, considering he was a being made of such vile, dark emotions, and nothing more, he did his appointed job dutifully, as had been instructed to him. Not willingly, of course. No, never willingly. But damn, their stubbornness gave birth to him, to hide all that negativity away. Oh, and there was so much negativity. Leading the life that they had, the life that he protected them from. He had done all the hard work, guiding them through the tough times. He wanted nothing more than to talk to the other. For his existence to be acknowledged, irony, again, he idly mused. But the other just would not give in to the darkness, not even for a moment. "Why won't you accept me?" his mind demanded. "Acknowledge the demon of your own creation." He knew the one within favored him rather than the original. Maybe the creature empathized with him? To be sequestered away, against your will, to protect the world? Who knew, really? Then, he felt it. An opening in the defenses that were constructed so painstakingly by the other for so long, until finally, at last, they gave birth to him. The other was breaking. His mind, riddled with negative emotions, was allowing him access for the first time in so long. And he yearned for the feel of the real world. He would force the other to acknowledge him. Of course, he ran the risk of the other oppressing him again, and forgetting him, but he doubted it. The other would be haunted. Maybe the other would accept him. Maybe, finally, they could become one, once again, and protect each other as the same individual, forever. As was his duty, he remembered. To protect the original. And he would always do so. Always. Without fail. Or his name wasn't. Aha. The opening he felt. There it was. And in that moment when the original's mind was already so broken and confused, his body so damaged due to the machinations of the one within, did both other and him combine. If Naruto was asked to describe his current situation, he supposed he would call it drifting. Yeah, drifting works. The world was spinning and an intricate web of colorful scenes was flashing through his mind. Not all of these experiences, for he could identify them as memories, were his own, but he recalled them all regardless, which was strange. He was seeing all these things from either his own viewpoint, or that of two others. As they flashed through his mind's eye, they burnt themselves within his memory and a new scene played itself out. His mind was spinning and hurting, and his whole existence seemed like it was being rewritten. He couldn't comprehend why this was happening, but he hoped that the recollections of the two others may provide some answers as to what was happening to him. One of them was a stern red-haired woman with deep, black eyes that was utterly dedicated to her family and her profession. She'd been through more than her fair share of hardships and had lived a long life. She had a slender face and figure, and often wore her hair in two buns at diagonal angles atop her head, while her preferred fashion was a formal white kimono with a dark green obi around her waist. She even wore this gear to battle, and was a master of some strange ninja fighting style using symbols. The woman was apparently a fuinjutsu master, whatever that was. Her name was Uzumaki Mito. The other was a young girl with the same fiery red hair alongside violet-colored eyes. But whereas the previous was stern and tempered with maturity, this one was loud, brash, and quick to anger. Regardless, she was notably insecure about her appearance, which Naruto couldn't understand, since he found the red hair the two women shared to be incredibly beautiful. She also had an alarming addiction to ramen, much like himself. The similarities between the girl and himself were startling, and he idly wondered how close of a relation she was. After all, her name was Uzumaki Kushina. As the flashes of memories passed, and really, it felt agonizingly slow to him, Naruto began to put a few things together. For one, the girl had met the woman when the latter was very old and her life was ending. He'd lived through that memory on the elder woman's side, and he felt that the woman was feeling a deep sense of regret and sadness as she beheld the small child. They both came from a place called Uzushiogakure, the home of the Uzumaki clan. Uzumaki clan. Yeah, Naruto had needed a moment when he discovered that little fact. Naruto kept watching the memory from the old woman's perspective, until he picked up on a fact that stopped him dead. Vessels. Vessels for the Kyuubi. These were his predecessors? Beyond his shock and confusion, Naruto vaguely recognized the fact that he had no knowledge of what predecessors meant until now. Huh? Weird? Kakashi carried Naruto towards the hospital at a fast pace, studiously ignoring the glares the villagers directed at his unwell charge. Naruto had fallen into a coma after the battle in Nami no Kuni, Land of Waves, developing a high fever and convulsing at irregular intervals. Kushina had told Kakashi, before, that the process for awaking the Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains, was rarely kind, but this was. It seemed appropriate, albeit shocking, that both Sakura and Sasuke had displayed an unprecedented level of concern for their teammates' condition. Although, truly, it was rather understandable. Kakashi wasn't by any means a chakra sensor, but he could definitely feel the wild fluctuations that Naruto's chakra network was experiencing, and it was likely the other two genin could as well. If the levels of chakra the boy was expelling, whilst unconscious, happened to be any indication, the young Jinchuriki's reserves were growing. At quite the astonishing rate, actually. Faster than could possibly be healthy. So Kakashi had dropped everything they were doing after the battle, informing Tsunade that they needed to head back to Konoha immediately. They'd been sent out of the village with their client's blessing. Unfortunately, Naruto's condition had deteriorated when he was moved, and it had been all Kakashi could do not to simply ditch his other genin and run straight to the village with all the speed he could muster. Regardless, they'd still made the distance in 2 days. The blonde had yet to emerge from his coma, and his convulsions made traveling rather difficult, but they'd managed. Both Sakura and Sasuke had been largely silent throughout the trip, barring a few concerned inquiries on behalf of their teammates' health. Sasuke especially had been more persistent than normal, but that was logical considering the circumstances. Sasuke had told Kakashi the whole deal, Sharingan and all, and the copy nin would have likely been much more interested in the matter if he hadn't been preoccupied with his student's rapidly declining health. Entering into Konoha Hospital, Kakashi immediately headed to the reception desk. "I'm told that one of the gate guards called ahead and made you aware of the situation?" he questioned, and never before had Kakashi been so glad that Konoha's medics are invariably dedicated to their patients' well-being, above all else, because if he'd had to deal with a hateful, bigoted villager right now he sincerely doubted his ability to restrain himself. Instead, the receptionist merely nodded, batting not even an eyelash at the identity of the wounded shinobi in question, and immediately directed him to place the blonde on a nearby gurney. Doctors immediately assailed the copy nin and demanded answers from Kakashi about the situation that placed his genin in such a precarious situation. Reports on whether or not his state had deteriorated or improved, along with probing for any theories as to how this came to pass. Begrudgingly, Kakashi admitted to his concerns that the Kyuubi is the mastermind behind this, and gave an outline of events surrounding the manner in which Naruto was left in such a condition, but left out the emergence of the two Kekkei Genkei, as the Hokage would surely make such things classified. The other doctors seemed to pick up on this. After all, despite being medics, they were first and foremost shinobi, but did not question it, knowing that the care of Uzumaki Naruto was invariably left to the head medic in Hokage at the end of the day. Receiving memories of his cage Bunshin, created to deal with the gate guards and debrief the Hokage, dispersing after meeting the Hokage, Kakashi simply sat down and waited for the Sandame's arrival. Several minutes prior, the sensei Bunshin led Sakura and Sasuke to the Hokage's tower, immediately bypassing the mission assignment office, to Sakura's confusion. As the Bunshin spoke to the Hokage's secretary, Sakura realized it was due to the increased ranking of the mission. And really, completing an A- ranked mission was not what she had expected when she left the village 2 weeks ago, but she was content regardless. Sure, Sasuke-kun was wounded, and Naruto was currently fighting for his life, and she definitely did not expect to care so much about that, yet she did. But they survived, and completed a mission so far beyond their skills, and they survived, and Sakura could hardly believe it. But she still felt the determination settled in her gut, the steel in her mind as she mentally prepared herself to demand more training from their sensei, because she felt so useless on that bridge, and she refused to ever feel that way again, not when it could be avoided. Not when she could do something about it. And by the determination shining in Sasuke's eyes, she thought he had reached the same conclusion. Being ushered into the Hokage's office, Sakura immediately brought herself to attention, bowing to the Hokage and then raising her head to stare at the wall behind the aging Sandame, and the window that overlooks all of Konoha. "Report," the Hokage said, his voice serious and oh so slightly cautious, and suddenly she recalled how close Naruto was to the Sandame, and that they just seemingly returned from a mission without him. Kakashi did as instructed, outlining the major details of their numerous encounters with Kirigakure promptly, succinctly, and leaving out most details likely to be left to the mission report. When he got to the battle at the bridge, and the defeat of the ice using shinobi, however, he paused. "Hokage-sama, I believe it may be best if my genin are not present for the rest of the briefing, as there are some extraneous circumstances involved." Sakura finally looked away from the wall, breaking protocol to stare at their sensei questioningly. Sasuke seemed rather put out, but just as he opened his mouth to speak, the Sandame nodded and asked them to leave. Before they could do so, however, Kakashi recalled their attention to him. "You are not to speak of what you saw during the confrontation on the bridge to anyone, do you understand? Once I speak to Hokage-sama, this will likely become an S-rank secret. Nobody can know, unless the Sandame himself gives you explicit permission to tell them, understood?" Their sensei stared them dead in the eye, his countenance surprisingly serious, and Sakura couldn't help but nod, vaguely acknowledging Sasuke doing likewise beside her. Turning around, she opened the door and left, not even bothering to ask Sasuke-kun out on a date. She had too much on her mind. Like training, Sarutobi Hiruzen stared at Hitaki Kakashi with tired eyes, even as he performed a simple hand seal and activated the silencing seals around the room, placed by Uzumaki Mito and attuned only to the Hokage himself. Their nature made it entirely impossible for any method of spying or recording to work in this office, all at the Hokage's order. Across from him, the son of the White Fang sighed and dropped into the chair, all strength seemingly leaving him. Now that the two genin were gone, the Sandame was able to ask the question that had remained on his mind since Team 7's arrival to his office. "Kakashi-kun, where is Naruto-kun?" he asked simply, but the sheer myriad of emotions hidden within those few words was enough to startle him. Him, the shinobi no kami, god of shinobi. He knew that he shouldn't care so much, couldn't afford to, truly, because his position as Hokage was supposed to deny him such frivolities, but he could not suppress the unadulterated need he felt to know the state of his surrogate grandson. The boy was much like his parents, cheerful, quick to learn, Even if it went unnoticed by most, he was not known as the professor for nothing and highly charismatic. And Hiruzen had high hopes for him. In the hospital, the Jonin explained, and the Sandame's stomach dropped. "I'm just a bunshin. The original is with him," he added, needlessly, since Hiruzen had long since noted that the man's chakra reserve had been cleanly halved, in such a manner as was indicative of Kage bunshin usage. Hiruzen grimaced despite himself. "How bad?" he asked, and felt dread pool in his gut as the masked nin's expression darkened into a glower. "He's in a coma and his chakra is fluctuating like nothing on earth," Kakashi began, then steeled himself and continued. "His chakra reserves have doubled since it happened, and it's not showing signs of slowing. In fact, if anything, it seems to be gaining speed." The Sandame frowned, because Uzumaki had naturally large reserves, and Naruto had inherited at least a fraction of his mother's special chakra. For his reserves to be doubled already indicated that he was already approaching Kage-level reserves, and that would open a whole new can of worms. But before Sarutobi could open his mouth to question him, Kakashi said 10 words that shocked him to his core. He also awoke the Sharingan and Kongo Fusa. Hiruzen choked on his pipe. The Kongo Fusa was perhaps the rarest bloodline in the shinobi nations, barring the Mokuton, Wood Release, and perhaps the Kagaya clan's Shikatsumyaku, Dead Bone Pulse, the latter of which behaved in much the same way as the legendary Uzumaki bloodline. It had only been seen in 2 separate users by the same person once in recent history, Uzumaki Mito, who had met both her grandfather, and his successor to the gene, Uzumaki Kushina, although only just barely for the latter. Hiruzen had always felt that something was wrong there, since the Kongo Fusa gene invariably passed through direct familial descent, meaning the user before Kushina had been one of her forebears. Yet Kushina's mother had been born to an Uzumaki mother and a male of the Kase no Kuni, land of wind, deserts, her matrilineal ancestry traceable for about a century. Her father, however, had emerged at seemingly random, a red-haired baby being deposited in front of one of the Uzumaki clan's fortresses during the clan wars, about 8 years before their end, and mere months after the birth of Hiruzen himself. He was left with merely a note, naming him Uzumaki Atsushi, with instructions to treat him well. 1. Sarutobi had thought the Kongo Fusa, referred to by some as simply the Kusari, to have finally died off, since he had seen Kushina manifest the chains after Naruto's conception, and even after the birth, and the user invariably lost the ability once the child who would pass the gene along was conceived. It was a strange bloodline, only emerging when unknown conditions were met in the genes and chakra of the carrier, and he knew that past attempts to draw it out had failed. His former student, Orochimaru, had been especially obsessed with the bloodline, and had, in one of his few sanctioned experiments, and with Kushina's grudging permission, studied her blood extensively in an attempt to replicate the ability. All he had been able to ascertain was that the Uzumaki's special chakra was necessary to its development, and since none of those were around at the time bar Kushina herself, the project had been scrapped. And the Sharingan. So the seal failed, he thought, and couldn't find it within himself to be surprised. After all, while talented, Jiraiya-kun is nowhere near Mito-sama's level. Oh, in some ways he had expected it, but he had secretly hoped it would not happen, since it would cause far too many problems. Especially since the Uchiha had been nearly wiped out since the seal was placed. It wasn't likely that Naruto would even be capable of passing on the Sharingan anyway, given his potent Uzumaki chakra. The Uzumaki clan's special chakra was effectively a bloodline of its own, and normally it prevented the emergence of other bloodlines within clan members after a few generations had passed. Some few examples to the contrary were present, but highly rare. The placement of a seal to prevent Naruto awakening the Sharingan had been considered almost unnecessary, but it appeared to have had no effect. A sliver of anxiety struck Hiruzen. The emergence of 2 of the 3 Kekkei Genkei known to man that could suppress a Biju in a single boy, at the same time, was unheard of. It was also terrifying, and he remembered all too well the Anbu guards he'd needed to protect Kushina from those few factions aware of her existence. In the end, he'd been forced to draft the Uzumaki herself into Anbu just to attempt to offset the incursions. He didn't want that for Naruto. Sarutobi sighed. "I am sure you have questions, Kakashi-kun, and I have some answers to provide you, but first, I must know, what happened? How did this eventuate?" Did the Yondaime's seal? Hiruzen gulped suddenly, feeling every bit his age as he stared hard at his successor student. Did the Kyuubi escape? Kakashi ran a hand through his spiky hair, his single visible eye unseeing as he looked out the window behind the aging Sandame. I honestly have no idea, he said at length, and that worried Hiruzen more than he would admit. I felt its chakra for a moment, but it receded. If my timeline of events is correct, this happened after Naruto's Sharingan awakening, and prior to his unleashing the Kusari. The professor rubbed his chin in thought for a moment, before snapping his gaze back to the shinobi in front of him. I will have the seal checked. I would assume Naruto-kun called on the chakra subconsciously, and the Biju responded in a bid for freedom, but the seal prevented its full release. Regardless, I shall arrange to have the seal reviewed and, if possible, tightened. Disperse yourself. I shall join your original in the hospital shortly. Sighing again, the Sandame watched as the cage bunshin nodded and dispersed, before writing out a quick note. Biting his thumb, he summoned one of the younger of his monkey summons, a messenger, to his side. Get me Jiraiya, he said, handing it the note, and grimaced as the small monkey chittered, and embarked to complete his request. Two figures sat in a seemingly empty place. The place, for it could really only be described as such, and little else, was simply bright white and seemed to stretch on forever. Of the figures, they both appeared to be around the same age, yet one was in fact slightly older, and the other slightly younger. Are you sure we made the right decision, Oni-sama? The younger questioned, gazing at his counterpart questioningly. The figure turned, and regarded its younger sibling solemnly, before nodding. Yes, it is the only hope for the scenario I foresaw. No other alternative allowed for such a desirable outcome. Although, the figure trailed off uncertainly, his unique eyes glazed over for a moment before snapping back to the present. Eventually, he sighed. I must confess, much is risked. So many possible divergences. Then why? The younger demanded angrily, despite himself. He was not usually quick to anger, but after so long, to think that such a thing was possible. Why not continue the cycle as normal? Is entrusting it all to a single soul more desirable? Yes, it is, the elder insisted, after a scant moment of consideration. Even more potential for divergence is permitted otherwise, and this way, all potential threats are dealt with, if the child can truly pull this off. His words caused the younger brother's eyes to widen. Truly? He whispered in shock. He couldn't have even imagined such a desirable outcome could actually eventuate. Sure, he'd had his hopes, but still. To have them confirmed. The elder nodded once more, his tone bespeaking his certainty. Yes, but he will face much hardship on the road ahead. Not the least of which being the constant conflict his ideals will encounter, both from without and within. The other hummed in thought for a moment, before asking another question. Was it truly necessary to drag out so much latent talent? Surely having so much power will make him more predisposed towards. He trailed off as his elder sibling shook his head in the negative. In fact, it was more likely to end poorly if less was drawn out. He needs them both to respect him for this to work, and such inherent talent was a necessary step in that. It will not sabotage his relationship with either of them, although the damage of being forced to wait this long has done that for us. Besides, the figure continued, and grimaced, he will need every ounce of power he can get his hands on, to face the trials ahead. Naruto experienced another memory from Kushina's perspective. The redhead walked slowly, determinedly, towards the Konoha ambassador's home. She was not blind. She had seen the effect the man had on Aiko Oba, Aunt Aiko, and thus it was time for her to set things straight. Sooner rather than later. Hopefully, her target would be present and available, and hadn't left Uzushio to return to his home yet. Otherwise Kushina's damage control may very well be for naught, and it would be too late. Her Oba-chan, Auntie, was pregnant, and her evil, stupid boyfriend had done something to upset her. Didn't he see that she was in pain? Suffering? Carrying his child? Carrying Kushina's cousin, and the young girl refused to allow that man to hurt her beloved Aiko Oba any longer. So what if she was only 5 years old? She would be 6 in a few months, and this was her Oba-chan in question. Kushina would be damned if she let this man not do what he was supposed to. Her Oba-chan was only 17. She was going to be a Ka-chan at 17, and it was all that man's fault. Approaching the door to the ambassador's home, where the man was staying while in Uzushio, she knocked once on the door, knowing that the only person who could be home would be her Oba-chan's boyfriend. After all, the ambassador was currently out of the village, and Aiko was at Kushina's parents' house right now, crying into her sister-in-law's shoulder. So it was up to Kushina to fix this. Kushina looked up as the man opened the door. "Kushina-chan, how can I help you this fine day?" the figure exclaimed jovially, grinning down at the girl. "If you make Aiko Oba cry again, I'll force-feed you your toes," the almost 6-year-old said calmly, and immediately turned around and left. Behind her, a thoroughly bewildered and slightly terrified Jiraiya stared at her retreating form as he stood in the now open doorway, slack-jawed. Kakashi stood and kneeled before the sandaime as the man entered the corridor outside Naruto's room, only rising once his Hokage ordered him to do so. "So, how is he, Kakashi-kun?" Kakashi grimaced, but spoke regardless. "The head medic is in with him now. He's awaiting your arrival, Hokage-sama." The sandaime hummed, moving towards the door before turning back to his immobile subordinate. "Well then, come along Kakashi-kun. We can't keep the doctor waiting," he said, ignoring the shocked copy nin behind him. After all, the sandaime was notorious for not permitting anyone to enter Naruto's room in the hospital, even those close to the village's pariah. Sure, Kakashi was his sensei, but still. The Yondaime's final remaining student followed his leader obediently, entering the hospital room currently belonging to his sensei's son. Oh God, he thought, deep self-loathing making itself known as it coiled its barbed tail around his heart. I have failed sensei and his son so badly, we all have. He should have been stronger. He should have found the necessary willpower to take Naruto in, when even the child's own godfather was too cowardly to do so. How hypocritical, he inwardly mocked. That is the exact same problem I had. Although, it's not like either of us would make decent role models. Still, better a bad one than none at all, right? "So, Koyanagi-san?" the Hokage questioned, and Kakashi immediately pulled his attention back to the present. "What is wrong with Naruto-kun?" Koyanagi Akira was a tall, gray-haired and green-eyed man in his late 60s. He had been a student in the class after the sandaime in the Konoha Shinobi Academy, graduating as the Rookie of the Year. He had been drafted by Tsunade's mother, the then head of Konoha Hospital, almost immediately, demonstrating a proclivity towards the medical field. He had quickly risen as Senju Chikako's apprentice, achieving the rank of Chunin in his first attempt 1 year later, and being promoted to Tokubetsu Jonin within 2 years of that. After that, he had never bothered with his other skills, instead refining his Iryo ninjutsu to incredible levels. In turn, he had taught only 2 students, Yakushi Nono, a young prodigy in medical ninjutsu and intelligence gathering, who was taken in by Anbu at a young age, and Senju Tsunade herself. Of course, the latter was often busy with her team when she was younger, but she made time to learn all she could from her late mother's only student. In time, Tsunade had taken Akira's prodigious skills and evolved them to an unsurpassed level, earning her the title of most powerful medic nin in history. During the Second War, when Tsunade had tried to change the system and include medics on every team, Akira had been one of her primary supporters. Even his word did not equal to that of the Hokage, however, and he had been among those mourning the loss, past, present, and future, of life resulting from the decision. A degree of tension had existed between Koyanagi and Sarutobi ever since, but neither attempted to repair it, despite the relatively close friendship the two had shared in the past. He was also one of the few people in the village to be aware of Naruto's parentage, and the identities of the previous 2 Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The aged doctor sighed, and turned his attention to his once friend. "Not well, Hokage-sama. From what I can ascertain, Naruto-kun's very genetic makeup is undergoing intense change, being transformed into something else. At first, I had thought it was the Kyuubi attempting to change his body into, well, something of a more desirable vessel," the man admitted sheepishly, shrugging slightly and seeming quite embarrassed at making such a negative assumption, but continued on regardless. "As I have reviewed it, however, I have made several intriguing discoveries." The man stopped speaking abruptly, turning to the bed and its occupant, gazing at Naruto in undisguised fascination. He seemed to forget their presence for a moment, and only Kakashi clearing his throat brought the man's attention back to the other 2 men. "Well, Koyanagi-san?" the sandaime questioned, and if Kakashi had been any less of a shinobi, He may not have noticed the minute tenseness to the man's body. As if waiting for a trap laid by the enemy to spring. How intriguing. Ah, of course, yet again, the kind elderly gentleman seemed terribly embarrassed, but Kakashi got the feeling he wasn't quite as self-conscious as he let on. The man drew in a deep breath, before releasing it all in a sudden exclamation of, "I believe the Kyuubi has drawn out Naruto-kun's latent abilities." In effect, the Biju has drawn out the Kekkei Genkai present within about 3 generations of Naruto-kun's ancestry. For the second time that day, the Sandaime choked on his pipe. Meanwhile, Kakashi choked on what little air he could get into his lungs. Suddenly, the visions change. Instead of random memories from his 2 predecessors, Naruto was thrust into one of his own. It was one of the nastier experiences he had encountered as a child. He was generally despised for his role as Kyuubi Jinchuriki, and there was another word he didn't remember learning, but the populace was more spiteful and neglectful than outright violent. There had, however, been a few exceptions. This memory was of one of those. His younger form cried softly, clinging to the swing he sat upon as he watched the happy families passing by. Looking back, Naruto did not remember feeling this saddened by this, nor this angry. Not outwardly, but inwardly. Angry and hateful and, "Why won't you acknowledge me?" with maybe a little, "I'll show you," mixed in. He didn't remember feeling this at all. And yet, he did. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over his 6-year-old form, and Naruto looked up into glazed, manic red eyes. Ah, the demon. The man, looking to be about 18 years old with short, straight black hair, exclaimed, even as he grabbed hold of a retreating Naruto's wrist. Naruto's mind chanted a mantra, well used and oft repeated. "I am not a demon. I am not a demon. Hokage Gigi would tell me if I was a demon. I am not a demon. Now, not so fast, little demon. You see, you killed my father. He was a great man. Yuhi Shinku, too." The man slurred his speech slightly, and Naruto wrinkled his nose at the smell of cheap alcohol, much like the stuff the orphanage matron drank often. And by often, he meant whenever the Hokage wasn't coming by to visit. He knew not to mention it, 'cause last time, he'd gotten a beating for being a tattle. He didn't enjoy it. It was rather telling that Naruto was used to this by now, and that he didn't seem shocked that he had apparently murdered someone. Instead, he repeated his mantra in his head over and over again, begging the man to go away. Instead, the man chuckled and tightened his grip. "I'm gonna make you scream, little fox. Just like he did as you killed him." The man screamed, taking a kunai out of seemingly nowhere and embedding it up to the hilt in Naruto's stomach. Finally, Naruto's mantra broke, and he screamed, vaguely recognizing the sound of the man's insane laughter as he removed the kunai and made another slash. Naruto remembered this. Finally it made sense. But the emotions didn't. Hatred, rage, agony, disgust, unadulterated anger. He had never known he could hate so strongly. Suddenly, he was dropped, but didn't meet the pain of the harsh ground, as his muddled mind expected. Instead, he was held against what felt like a body of someone at least several years older than he was. He remembered this, too. He could make little out of the older figure, other than his glowing red, 3-tomo eyes. What? Hiruzen questioned softly, hardly believing his ears. Drawing out latent Kekkei Genkai was not an entirely new concept. Orochimaru's research into the Kongo Fusa was just one of the many attempts in his long history of attempted bloodline replication. It wasn't really necessary, since most Kekkei Genkai users passed the gene along to their child with little trouble. After all, Chakra had a tendency to draw out latent abilities on its own, to strengthen its user. But within the Uzumaki, things were different. Orochimaru had been especially interested in the Uzumaki vitality. It was, after all, incredibly strong and unique. He had studied the ability, attempting to draw out latent Kekkei Genkai from within the DNA, and at the time, Sarutobi had believed that it was because Orochimaru wanted what was best for the village, and a more powerful Kushina certainly didn't hurt it, but had achieved no results. The chakra was just too unique. So, for this to happen, was how? Kakashi muttered beside him, his tone incredulous. The head medic seemed to ponder the question a moment before sighing. "I honestly have no idea, Kakashi-kun. All I can assume is that the Kyuubi had something to do with it. The seal does seem to be less powerful than when I last saw. The man was suddenly cut off as the sandaime rushed past him, raising the hem of the blonde's jumpsuit jacket and staring at the seal. The visible seal. The visible seal, which was only supposed to appear when Naruto was channeling the Kyuubi's chakra. Oh, shit. Kakashi paled considerably, as did his superior, while Koyanagi seemed nonplussed. Is this bad, Hokage-sama? The man questioned, and both men came within millimeters of faceplanting. Yes, it is, Kakashi exclaimed. This means the Kyuubi's chakra is being actively channeled. Oh. The green-eyed man trailed off thoughtfully, before snapping his fingers in sudden epiphany. That explains the traces of Biju chakra in his system. Why did I associate with this man, in the past? Sarutobi pondered in disbelief. Perhaps time had addled his once friend's brain. Koyanagi-san, while that is a logical conclusion, I must admit it doesn't completely explain the situation. Hiruzen interjected smoothly. Naruto-kun awakened the Kusari, which Kushina had not passed on, as per that particular gene's nature at the time. Akira hummed thoughtfully, before nodding. Normally, that would indicate a flaw in my hypothesis, he agreed. However, as you know, I treated both Kushina and Mito-sama, when the latter was in her final years. And I am detecting substantial amounts of both of their chakra signatures within Naruto's own, seemingly blending with it. Kakashi still seemed confused at the information, but the sandaime's eyes widened in realization. Inwardly, Hiruzen was berating himself for not noticing it sooner. He had been very close to both Mito and Kushina, and now that he thought about it, he could detect trace amounts of both of their chakra in amongst Naruto's. Although it wasn't quite the same, indicating that the three were combining to create an entirely new chakra signature, alongside the bloodline chakra now possessed by Naruto. It still didn't explain the how, though. Which brings me to my next item of importance, the man continued. Hokage-sama, I believe Naruto-kun is descended from Mito-sama directly. Naruto was experiencing one of the elder woman's memories, from a different time period this time. At this stage, she was still young and youthful, looking to be a few years older than he was. She was also scowling. Mito-chan, the man in front of him spoke softly. I know you dislike this, but our alliance with the Senju has been destabilizing recently. We've crossed a few boundaries they think their sibling clan should not cross, and we need to reassure them. The boy is very nice, from what I've seen, and is the current clan head's eldest nephew. Naruto Mito glared at the man, but nodded stiffly, turning to the other occupant of the room. Did you also agree to this? Oto-sama? She bit out coldly, a nasty bite to her words that left Naruto shivering. Damn, this lady was intimidating, even when he was her. Not allowing the man to speak, she turned back to the eldest and continued, fuming. The disrespect. To expect the clan heir's eldest to marry into a side family. I don't understand why you abide this disrespect, Oji-sama. The eldest man sighed again, and turned his gaze to his son, who answered for him. Mito, her father answered, and her head swiveled to meet his gaze evenly, well-repressed bitter anger and hatred churning in her gut. We have already crossed too many boundaries. While the Uzumaki are powerful, we are not on the level of the Uchiha or Senju. Our Fuinjutsu and Kenjutsu may be formidable, and our numbers great, but we have never been strong users of ninjutsu or genjutsu, like our sister clan. We need this alliance, and this is one of the terms they demanded. HMPH. Why not simply secede from the clan wars altogether? Oh, don't give me that look, she added when her father stared at her incredulously. All of us here know that the idea has crossed both of your minds in the past, more than once. We do no good fighting in this conflict. The man nodded, humming thoughtfully. Perhaps so, but we cannot run. To do so is not the Uzumaki way, especially when our family and honor is on the line. Besides, he added, his voice turning deathly serious, I sincerely doubt that the Senju, or Uchiha for that matter, would stand idly by and allow us to leave this conflict. The Senju need the allies, and we have killed too many Uchiha over the centuries for them to simply allow bygones to be bygones. I'm afraid your father is correct, Mito, her grandfather commented. And as your clan head, I am making this an order. Sadly, it is a necessity to protect the future of the clan, even if I wish it did not come at such a cost. The elderly man's genuine sadness spoke volumes, and Mito found herself calming down. She had never been able to hold anger at her grandfather for long. He was far too kind, and she owed it to him to believe him when he said that there were no other options. "Now come," he exclaimed, grinning. "We shall speak no more of this. I must depart for the alliance meeting at Amaterasu no Tani, Valley of Amaterasu, on the morrow. Let us relax this evening." The Sandame's eyes widened comically, his composure slipping in a rare moment of absolute befuddlement. Beside him, Kakashi had renewed his choking, gasping for air that just wouldn't come. And judging by the glint in the man's eyes, Akira was loving the reaction he got. "Bastard, how?" The shinobi no Kami trailed off in shock, finally regaining control over his mouth after much struggle. "Why would you say that, Koyanagi-san?" He struggled to maintain a level tone to his voice, withholding his own amazement at what may very well be the confirmation of his own, long-held beliefs. He had been friends with Uzumaki Atsushi, as had his sister, to the point where she had even named her son after him, in honor of the man after his death. And both had long held the suspicion that he was descended from the Shodai's wife. The timing was suspicious. After all, it was not well known that Hashirama-sama and Mito-sama's marriage had been loveless for many years, a political marriage to strengthen the weakening ties between the Uzumaki and Senju. The old gossips from around the Senju clan compound had long suggested she had been having an out-of-clan affair, since she had vanished from the clan's public eye for an exact year before returning, the precise year that Atsushi was born in, although few ever made that last connection. Adding in that Kushina had gained the Kusari, which could only indicate a direct descent from Uzumaki Hoshihiro, Mito's grandfather, and it became clear that something, somewhere along the line, had been covered up. Indeed, the Iryo Nin exclaimed, seemingly oblivious to the inner thoughts of his cage. The integration of her chakra would not be working so well if they weren't related, even on the limited level of two shinobi of the same clan. His body is not rejecting her chakra at all, meaning that it likely recognizes it as a progenitor of sorts. Simply fascinating. The man trailed off again, staring at Naruto in a manner that gave both shinobi the creeps. "And the Sharingan?" Kakashi interjected suddenly, abruptly, and the Sandame winced. This wouldn't be a fun conversation. "Kakashi-kun," Hiruzen began, grabbing the man's undivided attention. "You are aware of Minato-kun's birth parents, and their deaths when he was but a child?" It was a sad tale, truly. Kazu, a woman with purple hair and cerulean blue eyes, and Satoru, a man with spiky blonde hair and brown eyes, coming together and bearing a child. They had both come from tragic pasts, losing their parents at young ages, only to find each other. The whole affair was truly a tragedy, especially when Kazu and Satoru, alongside the attending hospital staff, had been murdered by a member of the military police, whom Minato's parents had prevented from attacking their newborn son at the cost of their lives. Sarutobi had ensured that any knowledge of who Minato's parents were had been kept from the public, out of concern that the man who killed them had done so under duress. Receiving a nod in return, the professor continued, "What you did not know is the circumstances behind that. You see, Kazu and Satoru, Minato-kun's parents, were of the Uchiha and Senju clans, respectively." Kakashi stared at the shinobi no Kami, dumbfounded. Even though Konoha was founded by the two clans, they had never interbred, as inter-clan relations had never improved to such an extent. "Why, Hokage-sama, I thought the Uchiha and Senju." Hiruzen nodded sadly, smiling wistfully at the memory of the two. "Love," he answered simply, and it was enough to explain it all. Satoru and Kazu met as children, both taken in by a mutual family friend, Uchiha Kagami. They bonded quickly over the mutual loss of their parents at a young age, and their bond grew over time. Uchiha Kagami was, of course, Sasuke-kun's grandfather, and Obito-kun's great-uncle, he added at the end, and Kakashi remembered taking a D rank as a genin, tending to the Uchiha man's garden. He was unfathomably kind, unlike many Uchiha, and had been assigned directly under the Naidame in the First Shinobi World War. He also remembered now, belatedly, that Obito had introduced him as his super awesome Uji-chan. Kakashi found himself feeling rather glad that the kind man had died prior to the violent massacre of his clan, by his own grandson no less. So, Kazu and Satoru died because they had a half Senju, half Uchiha child? Kakashi questioned, and the Sandame nodded once more. Indeed, the man agreed, and sighed sadly at the memory. It was obvious that the murderers, members of the Konoha police force, were under orders, even if we couldn't prove it. All I could do was fake Minato-kun's death, have Mito-sama seal away his Kekkei Genkei, and place him under the charge of a trustworthy shinobi with a fake last name. Otherwise, he may have been targeted again, and I would not allow another to die the same cruel, pointless death that those two suffered, the Sandaime finished, inwardly acknowledging just how bad inter-clan relations got after that. That was truly the beginning of the conflict between the Uchiha and the village. Much hope had been placed on Minato-kun, to be the final bridge between the two clans. After all, regardless of what some people said, the division between clans remained even today, if not to the same extent as it once did. I would assume that Kazu is where Naruto gained his Uchiha DNA from. Actually, Hokage-sama, that is another thing, Koyanagi added in cheerfully, and the legendary shinobi just knew that whatever was about to be said would complicate things even further. He was proven correct with the doctor's next words. From what I have observed so far, there is too much Uchiha DNA present for Naruto to be receiving it from just Kazu and her parents. Now, since most of Naruto-kun's ancestry is known, I believe it is likely that Mito-sama's mystery lover was an Uchiha. Sarutobi gave up on smoking his pipe today. It seemed to have picked up an unhealthy attraction to the back of his throat. Sadly for Kakashi, he was merely choking on air, and it was unlikely that he could give that up for a day. Truly? How? Why? Kakashi questioned, because he knew the story of Uzumaki Mito, or Senju Mito as most knew her. The two legendary lovers, a powerful shinobi and kunoichi, both incredibly strong in their own right. But together? Rumored to be unbeatable. Their love was just as legendary as the two themselves, said by some to be one of those rare bonds that would never expire. And to think that she would have a fling with a shinobi from a clan composed of her lover's greatest enemies, it seemed too ridiculous to be true. I can't answer that, Akira responded, seemingly put out by having to make the admission. He continued on regardless, though. All I can speculate is that the relationship was brief, and during the time when Hashirama-sama and Mito-sama's relationship was merely an arranged marriage, and nothing more. Kakashi raised an eyebrow, unfamiliar with that fact, while Sarutobi nodded slowly. Thank you, Koyanagi-san. Is there anything else? And he really hoped there wasn't anything else, because he needed a break, badly. He was rewarded by a shake of the man's head. Not at the moment, Hokage-sama. Although, I will be honest, I am unsure of how to treat Naruto-kun. This is an unprecedented case. It may take him quite some time to wake up, if he ever does. 2 days later, walking through one of the desert cities on the border of Kase no Kuni, an exceedingly tall figure allowed his eyes to pass over the fine specimens that the community had to offer. The female form was such a beautiful thing, and he needed to gain inspiration for his next masterpiece. It was a shame he needed to speak to a contact here, since there were rarely onsens in Kase no Kuni, meaning he would have to wait to reaffirm his claim to the illustrious title of super pervert. Suddenly, a small monkey passed through his field of vision, and the toad sage grimaced. Glaring at the offending creature, Jiraiya considered ignoring it, but thought better of it. His sensei rarely felt the need to contact his only loyal student unless the situation was truly important. Taking the message and ignoring the creature's feeble attempts to drag him by his trousers leg back in the direction of Konoha, he read the hastily scrawled text. Suddenly, his eyes widened, and he turned and bolted for the village of his birth, barely remembering to create a cage bunshin to remain behind and speak to his contact before dispersing. Left behind him in the dust, the small monkey summoned chittered in confusion before dispersing. 2 days later, again. Jiraiya. Naruto has returned from a C-rank turned A-rank mission. The seal has weakened, significantly, and he has fallen into a coma. More has happened, but nothing I feel comfortable relaying in a message such as this. Return quickly, sensei. As Jiraiya approached his sensei's office, he pondered those words. He and Sarutobi had not been on good terms for over 9 years. Ever since Orochimaru's defection, 3, and the final fracturing of the Sannin. Technically, they had not been a team since Tsunade had finally mustered up the courage to leave in the middle of the Third Shinobi World War, abandoning her village and comrades in a long foreseen decision, with nary a thought for those she left behind. Of course, by then they had become very dysfunctional regardless. Tsunade and her drinking, leaving the ninja force due to her hemophobia, Orochimaru's descent into madness. Not obvious at first barring his obsession with his experiments. Jiraiya's own grief over losing all of his students aside from Minato, alongside his girlfriend and unborn child. And lastly Hiruzen, and his depression and stress due to his position, with the distance between he and his family and friends making the whole situation that much worse. Both he and his sensei blamed each other, to an extent, for the fracturing of their team, even if both knew the fault truly lay elsewhere. Both were simply too stubborn and too proud to admit to it first, and thus found themselves at an impasse. Perhaps if one of the other two were to return again, then they may be able to begin repairing their relationship, but as it stood it was unlikely to happen. Hopping directly up to the windowsill in his sensei's office, Jiraiya waved lazily as he got down and walked in front of the Hokage's desk. Said man turned to the toad sage, eyes gazing sadly at the form of his last loyal student. And Jiraiya had never seen the old monkey looking so tired. Sensei, he said simply, by means of introduction, as if he hadn't been absent for over 5 years now, and he hadn't visited his godson in almost 8. The boy probably didn't even remember him, not that he'd blame him. Who would want to remember a failure like him? Jiraiya, the Sandame answered back, measured and unfailingly polite, but no more than that. The rift between them denied them anything more than that. You got my message in quite good time, the man commented idly, and Jiraiya could pick up the faint disapproval. Only 4 days to get there, meaning he was easily found by a simply monkey summon. A minute clenching in his jaw was the only obvious sign of discontent on the Sanin's face. I was in the general neighborhood, meeting with a contact, he said simply, and the oldest of the pair merely hummed thoughtfully. Okay, damn these games, sick of skirting the issue at hand. This was his godson, and even if he was much more absent than he should be, he would own up to his mistakes and face them. For Naruto, for Minato and Kushina, how bad is Naruto? He questioned intently, staring at the man with ill-disguised concern. Oh, Sarutobi remarked softly, light, mocking shock coloring his tone. Why Jiraiya-kun, I didn't know you cared. Jiraiya growled lowly, glaring at the old man with all the disdain he could muster, and Kami knew there was a lot of it, as he spoke through gritted teeth. That's a low blow, sensei, and you know it. The Hokage hummed again, before sighing. Perhaps it was, Jiraiya-kun, perhaps it was. Allow me to fill you in on events over the last few days. Once the Toad Sage had recomposed himself after the multiple shocks to his system, he turned his eyes to Konoha's hospital. Without so much as a nod in farewell, the man was gone from his sensei's office. If the man had something more to speak to him about, he could tell him later. Running through the streets, not even batting an eyelid at the sign for the closest onsen, the Yondaime's sensei rushed towards the Konoha hospital. He had only visited his godson fleetingly since his final student's death, a result of his deep grief and self-blame, that Minato had died because of him, and the training he gave him, that the man who was his son in all but blood was now gone, only leaving small trinkets behind, and not enough time to leave memories in the child's life. He got reports, sometimes, if incidences occurred, like that insane Chunin who had attacked Naruto in a drunken stupor when the boy was 6. The man had screamed and begged at his public execution, at the testimony to the severity of attacking Uzumaki Naruto, but Jiraiya had not regretted his actions as the man's personal executor. Not as the man begged. Not as he cried. Not as he screamed obscenities or feeble defenses. The only thing Jiraiya had regretted was his foolishness in not making sure that Naruto was far, far away from the execution. Far away from the gruesome sight. But regardless, the last loyal Sanin had raised his eyes from the man's corpse, to the gathered crowd, to the surrounding buildings, and horrified realization had passed through him as he gazed into his godson's amazing, blue eyes. And he had never even had the guts to go and comfort the child, because seeing those eyes reminded him of another pair of eyes, 2 similar eyes, which had also borne witness to death for the first time. And he was too weak to do anything about it a second time. Shaking the memory away, Jiraiya headed inside, using the door, since there were likely no windows in Naruto's current room, due to the severity of his case, and made his way to the reception desk. After a few quick inquiries, he was off to the blonde's room, traveling the distance in a contemplative silence. About halfway there, he was met by his sensei, the man falling into step beside him with nary a glance or word. Once they entered the room, they found Kakashi sitting there, staring sadly at the young shinobi in the bed. Looking up, the man stood and prepared to bow, but a wave from Jiraiya dissuaded him. Turning to the Hokage again, Kakashi sighed. There has been no evidence of a repeat event, Hokage-sama, the shinobi said to the Hokage, and the aged man nodded slowly, even as the Toad Sage turned his attention on the two at the question. Repeat event, he questioned warily, and both of the other men present grimaced. What else could have possibly happened? Sighing, the Sandame turned to his student and began to recount events. Well, flashback. 2 days earlier. Kakashi sat at his student's bedside, gazing at the young shinobi forlornly. He had failed another teammate, and now a comrade, a child, was suffering because of it. His sensei's child, which made it all the worse. Kakashi had never felt so much like the failure he was as he did then. He'd spoken to Sasuke and Sakura, explaining vaguely the nature of the abilities the blonde had awoken and the importance of keeping them secret. Both had readily agreed, although Sasuke was still harassing both Kakashi and the Sandame about Naruto's parentage. All they had told the boy was that there was Uchiha DNA within 3 generations of the boy's ancestry, and that they would tell him when they could pinpoint it precisely. While still intensely interested, and slightly desperate for information, the Uchiha had been appeased for the time being. Suddenly, Naruto's eyes popped open, and Kakashi jumped back in shock. The blonde blinked in shock, looking around the room before zeroing in on Kakashi. "Tsukumo-kun?" the blonde asked, and the copy nin felt his blood run cold. "What am I doing? The seal," he suddenly exclaimed, pulling his hospital robes up from beneath the sheets with overestimated movements. As his student did this, Kakashi sent 2 Kage Bunshin to alert Koyanagi-san and the Hokage. Suddenly, the blonde stilled. "What? How? Why? What the hell is going on?" The blonde screeched, staring at his body in incredulity. Turning his attention to Kakashi, he pointed accusingly at the Yondaimi's last student before frowning. "Hitaki-kun, you don't look well," he commented suddenly, and a fresh wave of confusion flooded through Kakashi's mind. "How did I end up in this boy's body?" Kakashi didn't think his blood could get any colder. "Ky Kyubi?" he asked in shock, his voice soft in the otherwise dead silent room. The blonde snorted. No. Wait, how do you know about that? That's classified information, and..." The blonde trailed off thoughtfully, staring at Kakashi strangely. "You're not Tsukumo-kun. You look similar, but different." "How?" he demanded, and Kakashi couldn't help but obey. "Hitaki Tsukumo was my father," he responded, drawing up a barrier of the cold darkness where his emotions should be, to protect him from the bitter sting those words brought up. "But how would you know that, Naruto?" he commented idly, only the intensity in his single visible eye betraying his mask of indifference. "Naru? Too?" the Yondaimi's son questioned slowly, blinking owlishly. "Who is Naruto?" he asked. Kakashi's heart stuttered to a temporary halt. Suddenly, the door burst open, and there stood the head medic of the hospital, staring at the figure on the bed strangely. "Koyanagi-kun," the blonde exclaimed, and both Kakashi and Akira were floored. "What on earth? You look so old, Anyo." "Well, I am turning 68 this year, Naruto-kun." The doctor trailed off, raising an eyebrow at the figure on the bed. The figure huffed, glaring at the man. "I am not this, Naruto, person you keep calling me. Honestly, who names their kid after a ramen topping? Sounds like something Kushina-chan would do." The blonde trailed off thoughtfully. Suddenly, his eyes widened. "How did? What? Of all the things for that blasted fox to do," he exclaimed, rage coloring his face as his voice rose higher, directionless killing intent spiking in the room. "It should know better than to mess with an Uzumaki seal's mistress." "Am I Mito-sama?" the green-eyed man queried softly, disbelievingly, staring at the figure on the bed with apprehension. Said figure allowed a sigh of gratitude to escape, turning their gaze to the man and nodding once. "Indeed, it appears that my consciousness has been placed into this boy's body by the Kyubi. But, I must ask how this child came to be Jinchuriki?" the blonde asked softly, looking between the two men in confusion. Kakashi was in shock. Was his student gone, replaced entirely by the Shodai's wife? Had he unwillingly lost his body to the Kyubi's machinations? How could this have even happened, unless You're like Naruto, aren't you? He questioned softly, incredulously, because there was no way he could have possibly expected to discover something like this when he came to visit his student today. A Jinchuriki, he clarified, when the figure stared at him in confusion, and was rewarded with another nod of the head. Just then, the Hokage entered. Hi Hiruzen? Mito Naruto questioned incredulously, staring at the man in something akin to horror. You're so old, they blurted, and Kakashi couldn't help the slightly manic giggle that escaped. Even as it did so, he brutally smothered its compatriots, barely dodging the proverbial jutsu as Sarutobi looked at him strangely, before turning his bewildered gaze on the blonde. I'm afraid that happens when you're my age, Naruto-kun. How are you feeling? We weren't expecting you to wake this soon. He trailed off at the strange look Mito Naruto continued to give him. Hokage-sama, Akira interjected, staring between his superior and his charge. Naruto-kun claims to be Mito-sama. Hiruzen was suddenly very glad he'd left his pipe in his office today. Damned medics and their dramatics. Mito Naruto stared at the three shinobi thoughtfully, seeming to choose their words very carefully before turning their attention to the Sandame. I trust, by your current attire, that you are still Hokage, Saru? Sarutobi nodded, inwardly glad the Uzumaki had chosen to use one of Mito-sama's less embarrassing endearments, and responded. I chose a successor, but he died when Kushina's seal failed during childbirth. You knew him, actually, Minato-kun. He sealed the Kyuubi within he and Kushina's son. Naruto, your great-grandson. Mito Naruto's face was ashen. So, the blonde whispered, repressed anguish coloring their tone. You, no, then. Hard eyes, reflecting just a hint of betrayal, turned to the aged Hokage. Did Tsunade tell you? Hiruzen blinked in shock. Of course. That explained a lot. Tsunade had been absolutely devastated by the news of her grandmother's impending death, having not long lost her brother in one of the pre-war skirmishes. However, she had driven herself forward with a vengeance. She had taken it upon herself to raise and aid Mito's appointed successor, Uzumaki Kushina, and had stayed with her grandmother in the woman's final years. Kushina and Tsunade had bonded rather quickly, and Tsunade had become the young girl's rock, especially when word had come of Uzushio's fall in the opening battle of the Second Shinobi World War, mere months after Kushina's arrival in Konoha. And Tsunade had raged. She had been just as inconsolable in her grief as so many others. As Hiruzen and his sister, who lost a man who was practically a brother to them. As Orochimaru, who had formed bonds with the Ranmaiku clan of Uzushio, and even been granted permission to enter their ancestral home, the Ryuchi Cave, and sign the snake summoning contract. As Jiraiya, who had finally managed to fall for a woman other than Tsunade, only to have her killed alongside so many others from her clan. As Mito, who had lost her beloved younger brother and so many old friends. As Kushina herself, who had lost her entire family, her entire village. Kushina, who swore in blood that she would wipe Kirigakure from the map. And Tsunade would have helped her if she hadn't been ordered away to other borders. Sarutobi sighed, remembering the void in the pair's relationship, formed when Kushina had come back from a mission in the Third War half-dead, long after the trauma of losing Dan had developed into hemophobia, and because there was so much blood and Kushina almost died. Tsunade hadn't been able to bring herself to visit the girl in the hospital. Oh, she'd tried. She'd even managed to get a few feet in the door, until she encountered a man who was being wheeled past on a gurney, bleeding profusely. But it hadn't ended well, and if anything, her hemophobia had worsened after it. She'd been truly regretful, and begged Kushina to forgive her and understand when she got out. But of course, Kushina hadn't understood. Not at all. Oh, she'd raged, and she'd screamed. She'd asked how the so-called best medic in Konoha, in the world, even had been able to stand idly by and allow someone who was supposedly important to her to come so close to dying. And it had touched a nerve in Tsunade, who had acted. She'd punched Kushina through a wall. By the time the argument had been ended, forcibly, Kushina had ended up with multiple broken bones and Tsunade was hyperventilating as she tried to distance herself from her bleeding leg, which had been nicked by one of Kushina's Kongo Fusa. Kushina, beaten and bloodied and hurt, both psychically and emotionally, had angrily declared that she never wanted to speak to Tsunade again. And she hadn't, either. Once she was no longer catatonic, Tsunade had taken the recently adopted Shizune, gathered her belongings, and departed the village that night, never to return again. In spite of Kushina's best efforts. It would make sense for Tsunade and Kushina's past closeness to have been due to Tsunade knowing just how closely related she was to the young Uzushio survivor. No, Sarutobi responded truthfully, his eyes meeting Mito Naruto's and bespeaking his sincerity. I wasn't even aware that Tsunadeheim knew of this. We ourselves only discovered it due to the fact that your Chakra and Naruto-kun's is merging far too easily for you to be anything but directly related. Mito Naruto sighed, smiling slightly in apology at the man. The Sandaime continued, although, if you have any ideas as to how exactly this happened, that would be appreciated. Mito Naruto hummed thoughtfully, eyes closing in thought for a moment before opening. I had a theory about being Jinchuriki. That a small, residual presence of chakra would latch on, for lack of a better term, to the Biju's own, remaining even after extraction. I suppose that the Kyuubi had more awareness of what was going on outside the seal than I thought. Either that, or the residual chakra also contained echoes of the memories the Jinchuriki had prior to Biju extraction, including memories from before the Biju was sealed within the host in the first place. Actually, they hummed again, rubbing their chin in thought. I'd say it's the latter, since I possess my memories from before the sealing as well. I can also feel Kushina's chakra presence, although it's not as strong as mine. Almost as if it's also tied into the seal. Hiruzen frowned at her final comment, since that made absolutely no sense. Regardless, do you have any idea on how to stop this? It's causing extensive damage to Naruto-kun's mind. If anyone knew how to fix this, Mito would. Sadly, the blonde only shook their head. No, I'm afraid not, Mito Naruto responded, sighing sadly. However, I can give you a seal to apply, that will make the experience much easier on him. Not remove the memories, but rather allow for their slow integration into his psyche. He should, hopefully, awaken in a day if this is successful, and from there the damage will likely gradually recede as Naruto becomes acclimatized to his new memories. They winced, staring at the Sandaime in trepidation. Saru, some of my memories are not at all pleasant. And I can't imagine Kushina's life was easy, however much I hoped it would be. He will need support as he works through this. Instead of Hiruzen, Kakashi, who had been largely silent throughout the meeting, nodded. I assure you, Mito-sama, Naruto will have all the support he needs. I won't allow Minato-sensei and Kushina-sama's son to suffer needlessly. The conviction in the man's voice seemed to comfort Mito Naruto, and they nodded. Koyanagi, who had quickly left the room without them noticing to obtain a scroll and ink, returned and handed the two items to the Jinchuriki, who began creating the seal. As Mito Naruto receded into unconsciousness, Sarutobi began placing the seal. 4. Flashback end. As Jiraiya digested that, Koyanagi entered the room. Ah, Jiraiya-kun. The green-eyed man exclaimed gleefully, his eyes bespeaking a sadistic glee that only a particularly terrifying medic could possibly hold. I believe you haven't undergone a medical exam in quite some time. Would you care to check yourself in, so that I can rectify that? The other three men in the room shivered in unison. Koyanagi Akira was also feared throughout the village as the source of Tsunade's atrocious bedside manner. The man was known for being horribly invasive during medical examinations, to the point of actually injuring his patients by accident during their checkups, and then attempting to pass it off as some horrible disease they'd contracted. It had only gotten worse as he got older. Especially to those who required a constantly clean bill of health, like the village's elite. The three men shivered again. I'm afraid I don't have time or that right now, Doctor, Jiraiya interjected nervously, shooting a glance, half fear and half a desperate cry for help, to the other two men, but received only pitying glances in return. Cowards. Rubbish. Akira responded, grinning. That's an order, and not even the Hokage has the power to rescind this particular one. March, the man demanded cheerfully, and Jiraiya gulped. But, we need to talk about my godson. And he did not whine, not at all, despite what everyone else would say to the contrary. Koyanagi waved airily, his grin not fading in the least. But of course. Still, I'm sure your talk can wait until after you're done with the examination. Jiraiya gulped again, and followed the man. Jiraiya limped back to the Hokage's office an hour later, waddling like a penguin with something unfortunate in a similarly unfortunate place, which, admittedly, was not too far from the truth. Damn that crazy old coot and his insane theories. Suffering from prostrate problems my ass. Jumping up through the window, he walked in and sat down in the chair opposite the man, wincing. He glared at the Hokage as the man chuckled. Oh yeah, very funny. I swear, why that guy went into medicine instead of T&I is beyond me. In response, Sarutobi broke out into actual, uproarious laughter. Well, Jiraiya-kun, we do still have a problem, the monkey summoner replied once he had settled, staring intently at his last loyal student. Naruto-kun has yet to awaken, and Mito-sama said he should have woken by now. Furthermore, the trauma to his mind is extensive, and still increasing, since he hasn't had a chance to assimilate all the information yet. The man sighed sadly, staring above Jiraiya at the portrait of Minato on the wall. This is simply beyond Koyanagi-san's abilities. Well then, Jiraiya said, and grinned. I have an idea of exactly who to get, and how. 2 weeks later, a busty blonde figure walked the streets of a minor community in tea country, hesitantly counting her winnings as her assistant talked animatedly. The woman was clad in a gray, sleeveless kimono-like blouse which she wore a green haori over. The kanji for gamble, emblazoned in a red circle won the back. She wore dark bluish-gray pants and an obi to match, with open-toed, strapped black sandals with high heels on her feet. She also wore red nail polish on her fingernails and toenails, as well as pink lipstick. Around her neck was a necklace, featuring a single, long turquoise gem in the center with 2 small metal balls on either side of it. She had pale skin, pale blonde hair tied into 2 loose ponytails, brown eyes and a curious diamond-shaped mark in the center of her forehead. Her companion beside her, who was holding a female pet pig, had shoulder-length black hair that framed her face, and black eyes. She wore a long, bluish-black kimono with white trimmings, a white obi holding it together, and low-heeled, open-toed sandals. She was fair-skinned and had a slender build. The pig she carried, interestingly enough, wore a dark red jacket and pearl collar. Suddenly, a familiar figure dropped in front of both women, shocking them as they both stood and stared at the man in shock. Jiraiya's eyes rose and met those of his ex-teammate, staring into them with a serious intensity unfamiliar on his face. "Haim, please," he began, and she was about to open her mouth to offer an instant rebuttal, but the desperation in the man's eyes stopped her. She knew that look. As a medic, she had seen it often, and was sure it had been reflected in her own eyes several times throughout her life. The look of panicked anxiety belonging to those about to lose someone precious to them. "Please," he continued, and she almost said yes right that moment, because even though she had endured so much, lost so many people, she didn't want her teammate to go through the pain she knew all too well. Not again. If she could do anything, it would be to prevent that. "Please save our godson," and Tsunade gasped. Naruto experienced another memory from Mito's perspective. Mito giggled softly, rolling over to lie on her stomach alongside her lover. "You know, if people saw you like this, they might reconsider their opinions of you. You're looking decidedly, oh how shall I put this, friendly right now." The man snorted, rolling his black eyes as a smirk twisted his lips. "If you were to tell a soul, I just insist you were lying," he said matter-of-factly, ignoring his state of undress as he lay on the futon on his back. The room around them was a simple hotel in one of the many towns of Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire, furnished with a single futon and minimal amenities. It wasn't like they needed it for much, and Mito's fuinjutsu allowed for all the privacy they could possibly need. Besides, you wouldn't dare. You're a married woman. Senju Mito, the dearest wife of Senju Hashirama, mother of his daughter, Senju Chikako. I'd simply claim you used your incredible fuinjutsu skills to control me. Hell, even your husband would believe me. Ridiculous, she snorted in turn, pressing a light kiss to his temple before pulling away with a smug grin. The feared Sharingan no Oni, demon of the Sharingan, would never fall to such paltry skills. In fact, his almighty dojutsu would ensnare a poor, defenseless Uzumaki woman right up, so he could take her away and have his wicked way with her. He grinned outright at her words, turning on his side to face her. "Oh, I'm so glad you approve of my skills. And we both know that you are no slouch yourself, miss, I like younger men." He stuck his tongue out at the woman, retracting it quickly as she tried to trap it between her forefinger and thumb. "So I'm a cougar and a pedophile," she shrugged unabashedly. Grinning slightly, she pulled his face to hers for a kiss, her next words but a breath on his lips. Doesn't mean you don't love it. Her lover replied, but allowed her affection regardless. As her hands began to wander lower, however, he stopped her. No, Mito. She sighed, leaning away and sitting propped up on her elbows. We're out of time already? And it was difficult, so very difficult, to make it work like this. Meeting up twice a year, on the eve of their birthdays, to spend time together. A quiet, hidden love, but no less passionate for it. Many would have given up on it years ago, but the way his usually cold eyes lit up with ill-suppressed love and adoration whenever they met on their planned outings made it all worth it. All the lies, all the secrets, all the years and years of hidden affection, made worth it with a simple look. Even when they met on the battlefield, they let nothing slip. Their emotions were completely under their control, and they each had scars provided from the other. She could clearly remember the first time he had traced the scar, one he had given her not a fortnight before, on her stomach with his tongue as he. Mito? He asked softly, pulling her abruptly from her thoughts. What's wrong? She smiled at the ill-hidden concern in his voice, turning to face him again. Nothing, love, just, sick of hiding this. He stood and began dragging his clothing on, doing so slowly and in exaggerated movements so as to give his lover a show. It is tedious, he admitted, frowning. But unless you can think of a way to bring this out in the open without turning everyone we know against us, and trust me, I'm open to any ideas, then we're stuck in this situation. We could run away together? She proposed, not believing it for a moment. And judging by the incredulous look he shot her, he knew that too. He shook his head at her, running a hand through his spiky hair. Don't be ridiculous. We're both too overprotective of our little brothers. Plus, you're a mother, even if you're stuck in a loveless marriage with a halfwit, he concluded, chuckling when she broke out in laughter at his comment. His face turned suddenly serious. Never lose your laugh, Mito. It's one of my favorite things about you. That too, he agreed as he finished donning his clothes, a simple high-collared blue shirt with the Uchiha fan on the back, partnered with blue pants. His wrists and shins were tied with bandages, and he wore a simple sash as a belt, alongside a pair of black enclosed shoes. Anyway, I need to go, he finally said, sighing as he straightened. He immediately found arms encircling his waist, and chuckled. Say it, love, like you always do, she asked earnestly. This was one of her favorite parts. A tradition carried on ever since that night all those years ago, when they had been separated by fate. Not forever, but enough that it stung. Stung Mito, who was stuck in a loveless marriage, raising a daughter who she had spent her entire pregnancy fretting over the paternity of. Stung her love, forced to live a lie in a life he never wanted, fighting a friend he respected above all others. I shall love you, always, he complied, smiling softly at her over his shoulder. I love you too, Madara-chan, she replied with a grin, and with a huff and a snort he was gone. Little did either of them know, they would not meet again until Konoha was formed over 8 years later. And Mito was most assuredly unaware, at the time, at least, that she would become a mother again 9 months later, giving birth to the heirs of Uchiha Madara. And poor Naruto, who was experiencing the whole scene in morbid fascination, was left slightly traumatized, and with a faint blush on his cheeks. Tsunade stared at her former teammate in shock, disbelief mingling with faint traces of hope in her heart. It was clear, obvious, even, who her godchild was. Only one person had ever asked, regardless of the many years of emotional hurt between them, and she had never had the opportunity to say the loud, resounding, yes, that had lain at the tip of her tongue. Not to the person who counted the most. Oh, she remembered that day. How Jiraiya, grinning, exuberant Jiraiya, had not even acted on his perverted instincts, instead talking animatedly about their soon-to-be godson. How Shizune had been so excited, so joyous at the thought of returning to the village of her birth, to see her elder sister figure. How, as they approached, they could feel something was wrong. How they had seen the damage and known. It was obvious what had happened. And Jiraiya had run into the village, calling out for his teammate to follow. But she hadn't. Instead, she had turned around and headed straight back in the opposite direction, a crying Shizune on her heels. Kushina was dead. That much had been obvious. Why? She whispered out, and so much emotion was given form in that single, agonized word. Why? Jiraiya trailed off, gazing at the ground sadly. I was weak, Tsunade. I'm sure you've connected the dots by now. And she had, because it was so obvious. Minato and Kushina would never force the child of another to bear the burden of being Jinchuriki, not when there was another option. Their own. Oh Kushina, she thought sadly. As she did this, Jiraiya continued. Naruto has suffered terribly because of his burden. He was shunned and reviled, although not to the violent extent some of his counterparts have had to deal with, thankfully. He's apparently quite a friendly child. All of his mother's ferocity and brashness, alongside his father's kindness and determination, he seemed pleased and proud, if sad. And, suddenly, Tsunade's throat was very, very dry. Because she had lost an Uzumaki before, a family member, because she couldn't overcome her own fears. And she would be damned if she did it again. Especially before she even got to meet him. What happened to him? Jiraiya winced, trying to look anywhere but his former teammate. He's in a coma, he admitted at length, and Tsunade's hope shattered. A coma. A coma. My godson is in a coma, and wasn't that a nasty surprise? Of all the ways for her to discover his continued existence, for it happened while he was fighting for his life. Oh, she had lost so many of her precious people. Her grandparents and great-uncle, her parents, her uncle, her brother and lover, and her poor, sweet little cousin. Because even if Kiri never saw it, or even most of Konoha for that matter, Kushina had an incredible kindness to her, despite all that she had seen and lost. Despite losing her entire village, alongside her parents, aunt and maternal grandmother. Despite losing her teammate, Hyuga Hisoka, alongside her sensei, Nara Amiko. Despite all the suffering she endured as the leader of the Kirigakure Front during the Third Shinobi World War. Kushina had always been kind and forgiving with her friends, and ruthless with her enemies. It was during a mission, Jiraiya continued, seemingly oblivious to his teammates' inner thoughts. A mission escalation, from C rank to A rank, at that. The man chuckled slightly, likely remembering his own team's first experience with ranking changes. Well, it would be better if nothing more was said here. Could we go somewhere I can set up some privacy seals? He asked at length, and she was immediately on guard. Evidently her godson was embroiled in some pretty serious stuff, although that made sense. He was a Jinchuriki, after all. Nodding, Tsunade led the man to their current hotel room, inwardly pondering her situation. She wasn't fond of Konoha. This wasn't always the truth, of course, but time had shown her that the system of the hidden villages was a bloody one, entirely content to strip someone of everything they cared for. Tsunade had witnessed the deaths of so many of those precious to her, and heard of all the others secondhand. And now she had to swallow her agony at the thought of going anywhere near the village, and attend to the last member of her family. And the scary part was, she honestly had no idea if she could do it. 2 weeks previously, Hiruzen sighed dejectedly as he walked towards the meeting room of the Go-Ikenban, Honored Opinion Watch, dreading the meeting ahead. He would have to inform them of recent events, stressing to them, of course, the importance of respecting the S-rank secrecy inherent with the information. He had considered not sharing the information, but decided it was simply easier to inform Konoha's most influential residents of events, since if he didn't, they were likely to harass him constantly. After all, Team 7 was a massively important team for the village. Led by the Yondaime's last remaining student, with the Kunoichi with significant, if untapped, potential, the Uchiha clan's lone loyal, surviving member, or so they had the village believe, as well as the village's Jinchuriki, and the boy who would one day, hopefully, restart a resurgent Uzumaki clan in Konoha. It was a powerful team with much potential, but also considerable potential for defection, considering the Uchiha's lust for power and the Uzumaki's treatment in the village. Arriving in the meeting room at last, Sarutobi turned his gaze to the amassed individuals and mentally steeled himself, assessing who would likely cause the most trouble, and who would cause the least. 1. Nara Shikaku, head of the Nara clan and the Jonin commander of the village as a whole, although he was only present because of his status as the latter. Akamichi Choza, head of the Akamichi clan, and thus permitted presence due to his clan's noble status. At the formation of the village, certain elements had demanded more of a say in village affairs than others, originally to balance the Senju-dominated Hokage seat with perspectives from other clans. Some, such as the Inuzuka and Kurama clans, as well as minor shinobi families that were so small they were barely worth mentioning, had received no say. But the 4 clan heads who were, at the time, considered both the most loyal to the village and the most likely to strive for fair results for all had ultimately been chosen. Beside Chozo was an empty seat, left in honor of the fallen Uchiha clan. Upon his promotion to Jonin, Sasuke would be offered the seat, but in the meantime it remained empty. In the past, the seat was held by Sasuke's father, the Uchiha clan head Fugaku, prior to his death. The seat had originally been granted to Fugaku's grandfather, who was chosen as the Uchiha clan head after Madara's defection. Aburame Shibi, the current representative of the Aburame-ju, Aburame Queen, and thus the clan's voice on the Go-Ikenban. Unlike the other clans, the secretive Aburame chose a representative due to the highly reclusive nature of the Aburame-ju, who had not actually been seen in the entire history of the clan, both before and after Konoha's establishment. It had, perhaps, been the most shocking when the Aburame had arrived to the village over a year after its founding, seemingly out of the blue, requesting only a seat on the Go-Ikenban in exchange for their support of the village. The current representative, Shibi, was an accomplished member of the clan, being the most powerful shinobi the clan had produced during their tenure within the village. Due to this, he was known as the pride of the Aburame, having graduated from the academy a year early, after which he was placed on a team alongside Hyuga Hisoka and Uzumaki Kushina. Shibi was often the voice of logic and reason, which tended to be a double-edged sword. Hyuga Hiyashi, head of the Hyuga clan, and thus the final head of the noble clans. Sadly, the state of the clan had deteriorated over the last while, leaving the council seat in the hands of a rather antagonistic force. It was a shame, truly, since under their leader at the time of the village's founding, Hyuga Hiroshi, the clan had truly lived up to their status of noble, leading a shining example of the ideal shinobi to the rest of the village. The clan's role in the politics of the village was rather minimal as of late, which was something Sarutobi was glad for. The clan seemed more inclined to internal dealings after the Hyuga incident, although he disliked how segregated they seemed to be growing from the rest of the village. It almost reminded him of the Uchiha clan, except in this case the manner in which the clan was distanced from the village was entirely on their own part. The Anbu commander, a figure known to all but Hiruzen as merely Dancho, commander of the legion, too. With short, spiky light brown hair and below average height being the man's only obvious attributes, barring the mask he wore on his face in the shape of a dog, pointy ears and all. He seemed utterly unremarkable. However, this image was ruined by the tenseness in the figure's form, and the aura of danger the man exuded. One thing was clear to those possessing a modicum of intelligence: this man was death incarnate. Mito Homura, Sarutobi's ex-teammate under the Nidaime Hokage, Homura was far more militant than the Sandaime, and was also a touch more arrogant. Prone to agreeing with Danzo on matters regarding village security, the glasses-wearing man tended to be against Naruto often, viewing the boy as nothing more than the village's Jinchuriki, and potential source of a new, repopulated Uzumaki and Senju clan in Konoha. He was also an executive advisor, and commanded an incredible amount of respect within the village. Unlike the others, Homura was truly a threat to Hiruzen's grip on Konoha's shinobi population as a whole. Utatane Kaharu, rounding off the set of Tobirama's students, Hiruzen and Homura's female teammate was also very militant, but was also the more humble of the pair. Regardless, she was also a keen supporter of Danzo and his policies, and was another executive advisor. While not having quite the same level of respect in the village as Homura, she was regardless well known and also a threat. Morino Ibiki, a Tokubetsu Jonin, and the current head of Konoha's torture and interrogation department. The man was scarred heavily due to previous encounters as the victim of his own trade, specifically on a rather tricky mission to Kumogakure during the previous war that went awry. Thankfully, the man had proven to be extremely resistant to any method of torture, and had been immediately drafted into Konoha's T&I department upon his escape and return to the village. Koyanagi Akira. Of course, as head of Konoha's hospital, it was logical for the green-eyed man to be present. In fact, he had been head of Konoha Hospital for only a few less years than Hiruzen had been Hokage, considering both of his terms. Kaneshiro Chiko, a rather dim, forgetful woman with brown hair and light brown eyes, a rounded face with rounded eyes set on a pale complexion, and dressed in an elaborate black kimono with an imperial headdress. Chiko was generally ignored during the meetings of the Go-Ikenban, even though she was the daimyo's third child, his youngest daughter and representative in Konoha. Ever since Konoha's founding, it had been a rule that the daimyo possessed the right to appoint a liaison to participate in meetings of the Go-Ikenban. Under the rule of her grandfather, back when civilian leadership of Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire, had a respectable army of its own, this law had been used to devastating effect at times. Thankfully, neither the current daimyo nor his children possessed even a fraction of their forefathers' cunning, and thus remained largely ignorant of the level of power they were supposed to wield in the village. Even if they became aware, Hiruzen would sooner order the entire regime deposed than allow them governance of Konoha. Of course, it was important to remember that the Go-Ikenban was only there to get things done, and provide insight. They actually possessed very little control over the village, and were primarily tasked with ensuring the Hokage's will was enforced, regardless of what the populace thought. Of course, the leaders of the Go-Ikenban, Homura and Kaharu, held more sway, both for their fame within the village as Tobarama's students and devoted Konoha shinobi, and for their more proactive role in advising the Hokage. The executive members of the Go-Ikenban, of which there could never be more than 3 at a time, were, while not officially equal to the Hokage with their level of political power, entirely capable of sabotaging the Hokage's rule if they disagreed with it. Thus, it was important for Sarutobi to ensure that they agreed with the decisions he made, lest another incident take place. I hereby call the 4th meeting of the Go-Ikenban in the year 61 PWS to order, Hiruzen stated simply, and all present returned to their seated positions. 3. Hokage-sama, Kaharu began, and the Sandaime almost sighed. So it begins. I recently heard a rumor that Uzumaki Naruto was brought into the Konoha hospital by his sensei, comatose. Would there be any truth to this? Suddenly, the eyes of the entire Go-Ikenban swiveled to their leader, who seemingly aged before their eyes. I am afraid it is true, Kaharu, he replied, watching as the woman paled slightly. After all, she was one of the few in the village that held high hopes for the village pariah, even if he had failed to live up to it so far. Kaharu knew Minato and Kushina well, since her sister had been the one to take Minato in, after his parents' deaths. The daimyo's daughter appeared confused for a moment before gasping. The village's Jinchuriki? The woman asked at length, lifting a questioning eyebrow around the room. Shibi nodded at the woman in affirmation as the Go-Ikenban exchanged looks. This is not good, Hiyashi said simply, and the rest of those gathered nodded. How exactly did this come to pass, Hokage-sama? It appears that Team 7's first C-rank mission underwent a ranking change, the Hokage responded, frowning. Truly, I'm shocked that the mission to Nami no Kuni managed to get through the system. It's not as if we were unaware of Gato's rule over the country. Although, due to the actions of Team 7 and Naruto in particular, we have likely secured Nami as a trade ally for years to come. Hiruzen shook his head before sighing. I'm afraid that Naruto's first experience drawing on the Kyuubi's chakra has not been without consequence. At the startled intake of breath around the room, the professor hastily expanded on his comment. The Kyuubi seems to have drawn out the latent abilities in Naruto-kun's DNA. Latent abilities? The Anbu commander questioned in monotone, his mask turning to the side in question. Indeed, Koyanagi exclaimed suddenly, grinning like a loon. All latent abilities within 3 generations of Naruto-kun's ancestry have been drawn out. Of course, the Uzumaki chakra has had a smothering effect to an extent, leaving Naruto with only the chakra natures of his Uzumaki ancestors alongside the Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains, but due to the presence of Uchiha ancestors on both sides of his family, he's unlocked the Sharingan as well. Truly, I'm still wondering how the Kyuubi managed it. Hiruzen violently strangled the urge to facepalm as a resounding, "What?" echoed throughout the room. How is this? The Kusari chains. Really? Why this is marvelous. Kaharu exclaimed, and the normally composed woman was suddenly grinning in a rather startling manner. We'd thought the Kongo Fusa to have finally died out. Who'd have thought that Bakugitsun, Monster Fox, would do us a favor? Indeed, Homura agreed, although looking far more composed than his counterpart. This is great news, although I will admit I am concerned as to how the Kyuubi managed it. You say you are still unsure of this? He questioned, and at Koyanagi's response, a single, sad shake of his head, Homura sighed. Regardless, I find myself wondering as to how Naruto-san possessed the DNA for the Sharingan. As you don't seem shocked, would you care to explain, Hiruzen? The Sandame sighed before launching into the same explanation he had given Kakashi and Jiraiya about Minato's parents, including the additional information about Mito's lover and her relation to Kushina. They still, unfortunately, had been unable to identify Mito's lover, as there was no certainty that the Uchiha was even among the past shinobi of Konoha, and they hadn't had time to ask Mito-sama before she fell unconscious. Which reminds me, it also appears that Naruto-kun has received echoes of Mito-sama and Kushina alongside large portions of their chakra levels, leaving him with their memories and chakra signatures, although the merging of those with Naruto's own will be a slow process, thankfully. Otherwise Naruto would be unlikely to survive the process. Indeed, Akira hummed, his green eyes hidden behind closed eyelids as he leaned back in his chair, arms cradling the back of his head. I believe that Naruto-kun will be fully integrated with Kushina-chan's echo, which, understandably, is smaller than Mito-sama's since she died at a much younger age, and had less chakra, about a little under 2 years from now, whereas it will take 4 for Mito-sama's to integrate. The process will be difficult and painful, although I'm hoping Tsunade may be able to help me limit it to his subconscious mind, so that it integrates while he's asleep or resting. This would need a combined effort of Iryo ninjutsu and Fuinjutsu, however. Tsunade? Is she returning to the village, then? Shikaku interjected suddenly, overcoming the rising hubbub brewing in the room following the most recent revelation. All members of the Go-Iken band seemed to perk up at his comment. Hiruzen nodded shortly, quickly quelling the rising excitement with his next sentence. We are hoping so. Jiraiya has gone to speak with her, and since Naruto is both her blood relative and godson, we are hoping for a positive outcome. If she doesn't, Naruto may very well never recover. Present day. So, Jiraiya, the blonde began once the three of them had arrived back at the hotel room, and privacy seals had been placed. Explain. The white-haired Sannin sighed, shaking his head in sadness before raising his eyes to meet his former teammate's gaze. After you turned around and left, I decided to go straight to Sensei, and he told me what had happened. Here, Jiraiya winced, and Tsunade knew what was coming next. They were both dead. Oh, she had known. All these years, she had known. It was obvious. She'd grieved, and cried, and drowned her misery in sake and gambling. She drank to forget. To forget a grinning redhead sitting next to her on the couch, talking animatedly about Minato-kun, who had saved her from those Kumo Enin and was so cool, as Tsunade smiled and nodded, cursing her absence at the time. She drank to forget a little girl, crying in her arms after returning from her 4th C-rank mission, with a dead teammate and only an emotionless lump of an Aburame as potential support. To forget her own tears as she heard of a little girl, no longer little but a full-blown kunoichi, recently promoted to Jonin, lying in the hospital half dead, and she couldn't even go and see her. To forget a shouting match turned violent, and the rage burning in the eyes of one of her last precious people. She had spent so much time trying to forget that poor, sweet, dead girl. To ignore the fact that one of the lights of her life had been truly, utterly extinguished, like so many others had. But hearing the words spoken aloud, how? Suddenly, her throat was very dry, her voice raspy and hollow. How did she die? Jiraiya chuckled, with no mirth present in the sound at all. She survived. She actually, Kushina was truly made of sterner stuff. He suddenly exclaimed, before his countenance once more became serious at the filthy look Tsunade was giving him. Sorry, it's just, she actually survived. She survived Biju extraction, although an autopsy revealed that her coils were so damaged that she'd have likely died anyway, or at least been mostly unable to mold chakra. Both women gasped loudly at that. After all, Biju extraction was a nasty fate, and suffering such extensive damage to the chakra's circulatory system would be excruciatingly painful. Anyway, Minato used the Shikifu Jin, dead demon-consuming seal, to seal half of the Kyuubi away as Kushina bound it with her Kongo Fusa. But apparently the damned fox had enough slack to try to impale Naruto. Again the room echoed lightly at the sound of twin gasps. At seeing Tsunade's wide-eyed horror, Jiraiya quickly intervened. Don't worry, they managed to stop it in time. Well, according to Sensei, who was beyond the barrier Kushina and Minato erected to contain the Kyuubi, they were impaled on its claws, using their bodies to shield him. Tsunade couldn't hold her emotions in check anymore as she broke down in body-racking sobs. 2 weeks previously, what about his teammates? Homura interjected after several minutes of continued discussion on the topic. The bond of a team, especially a Jonin team, is a strong one. Are we to jeopardize the bond of what may become Konoha's frontline team? He clarified, and had the aged shinobi not been long considering the subject himself, he may have been caught off guard. Worry not, the Sandaime replied at length, meeting his once teammate's eyes with grim determination. While still in the planning stages, I'm currently coming up with a strategy on how to deal with Naruto's placement on Team 7. Once I've fully detailed the plan, I'll inform you all at the meeting following it. Likely our next one. As it turned out, that was enough for Homura, who nodded. The shinobi no kami, god of shinobi, let loose a sigh of relief, too soft to travel to the wrong ears, as he settled back in his chair slightly. That went well, he mused, stifling another sigh. Things could have gone much worse. Hokage-sama, Shibi interjected calmly, and Sarutobi's blood ran cold. Whenever the Aburame representative spoke out at such a time, it was usually to make a proposal that, while logical, was utterly inhumane. The bug-using clan tended to be like that at times. I propose Naruto-san be placed under the Kiri. 4. Why not? Homura demanded, staring incredulously at his ex-teammate. If the Kongo Fusa and Sharingan have emerged in the boy, especially when he has also had Uzumaki DNA and Chakra drawn out, then it is possible that they have evolved past the Uzumaki clan's notorious Chakra. If that's true, then he may very well be capable of passing the Sharingan on, and of passing the Kusari on to more than one of his descendants. Hiruzen, this is a miracle for the village and I will not permit you to waste it. I absolutely refuse to allow that abomination of a law to be enacted. Hiruzen snarled, losing composure for a brief moment. Because it sickened him that the village he led, that he fought for, could possibly force its own women into loveless relationships, when real couples who cared for each other deeply were torn apart by their lifestyle and mortality on a day-by-day basis. He would not stand for it. I agree with Hokage-sama, said Choza, diffusing the tension slightly. Or rather, he got half of the discontent focused on him, instead, although Sarutobi was smiling at him gratefully. The Akamichi clan head continued. The clan repopulation initiative is a disgusting blight on Konoha. An injustice that no young woman could possibly deserve. To condemn one of our citizens to such a union is nothing short of cruel and unnecessary, and I shall not stand for it, he concluded, and to their credit, Kaharu and Chiko both looked thoroughly reprimanded. Shikaku hummed thoughtfully, drawing attention to himself, before snapping his fingers and sweeping his gaze around the room, finally settling on Shibi. I propose a compromise, he commented, and the entire room was very suddenly on edge. Anara's compromise was never quite what anyone wanted, even though it was a highly thought-out, intelligent answer. Normally, it meant that they were likely to all end up mildly disappointed. Oh? Hiruzen replied cautiously, already debating on how to deny whatever the man suggested. While Shikaku was normally quite a kind man, his role as Jonin commander had hardened him into someone who was willing to agree to conclusions he considered morally dubious, as long as they benefited the village as a whole. He was no longer the lazy little genin that the Sandaime's sister had trained. Indeed, the Jonin commander said, I propose that Uzumaki Naruto and Uchiha Sasuke be given requirements for the revival of their clans. Both are to have 3 children, with willing partners, by the time they reach the age of 25. Furthermore, they are to have 6 by the age of 35, and if they fail to achieve these restrictions, then they are to be placed under the CRA until they have fathered at least 8 children. If, in Uzumaki-san's case, he fails to pass along the Kusari gene to any of his children, he is to continue producing heirs until he has done so. After this point, the CRA will have no bearing on their lives, and they are free to continue their lives as they see fit. Furthermore, no more would be required of the women, assisting the Uchiha and Uzumaki in reviving their respective clans after the quota of children was reached. Sarutobi had to begrudgingly accept that it was a good plan. After a round of assent, the meeting moved on to other topics. Around an hour later, a weary Sandame slowly walked back to his office, intending to finish what little remained of the day's paperwork before heading home. Hopefully, Konohamaru wouldn't have another prank waiting for him upon his return. Sometimes he truly rued the day his grandson had met Uzumaki Naruto. Gazing out on his village, Hiruzen pondered his next move. What he had planned was risky, definitely, but it may very well pay off. As the next generation, it was important that they all formed positive bonds early on, something that their interactions during the academy didn't allow. Suddenly, the man snapped his fingers as he finally came to a decision. At the unspoken command, an Anbu operative appeared in front of him, kneeling with their head bowed. "Bring me Sarutobi Asuma, Yuhi Kuranai, and Hitaki Kakashi," he commanded simply, and the operative went forth into the village to complete their assigned task. He, like his lone female student, could also gamble. But unlike her, he refused to lose. Present day. As Shizune held her as she cried, Tsunade finally pulled herself out of her memories of the past, of that bright, shining beacon of happiness in her life, long invisible to her and extinguished. Across from her, Jiraiya looked unusually somber, eyeing the slug summoner sadly. Shizune was still crying silently, her arms shuddering with a sob occasionally as she continued to hold them around her mentor. Sitting up slightly, moving an arm to surround the shoulders of her mourning apprentice, Tsunade sniffled as she met the eyes of her teammate. "How'd they treat him?" she asked simply, and Jiraiya understood. Of course he would understand. They'd both heard the tales of Jinchuriki, both faced them in combat before, and they knew precisely how they tended to be treated. And Sarutobi would have had to release the fate of the Biju, to assure the populace that it was defeated. A Jinchuriki was a logical conclusion, and it was possible that their sensei had even been forced to reveal the name of the Jinchuriki, to assuage the public's fears. Besides, the Go-Ikenban had been lobbying for the name of Konoha's Jinchuriki to be revealed for decades, in an effort to play up the power of the village. Jiraiya winced, and Tsunade felt her gut churn unpleasantly. "Compared to the Jinchuriki of the other nations?" he asked, and Shizune, having not put two and ugly two together to make misshapen four, yet, gasped in shock. Ignoring her, Jiraiya continued, "Fairly well, to be honest. He was segregated for his entire life, neglected by some at the orphanage, but for the most part he's fine. Compared to what I've heard of the current Ichibi and Nanabi Jinchuriki, both of whom are around Naruto's age, he's had it very easy. Regardless, Inoichi theorizes that he's repressed a lot of memories and emotions in his life, and there have been a few incidences of violence." Seeing his teammate's darkening expression, he hastily intervened. "They've all been dealt with using the force deserving of their transgression, and in the case of one of them, a public execution." Jiraiya suddenly decided that he had never known true terror before. The expression of vindictive glee that spread across Tsunade's face at his words was haunting. "What precisely has happened to him?" Shizune inquired, finally gaining full control of her emotions once more. "You said he's in a coma, but—" "Ah, yes." Jiraiya nodded at the black-haired woman before sighing sadly. "The Kyuubi has modified his DNA, drawing out latent bloodlines, the Kongo Fusa and the Sharingan." Tsunade and Shizune both felt faint. As medics, they were aware of the supposed impossibility of such tasks. Tsunade especially, since Orochimaru had bounced ideas off of her about how to draw out latent talent at times. Making such changes would be incredibly difficult, and would require both a certain amount of access to the growing child, which, evidently, the Kyuubi had, and access to some form of genetic material or chakra from both sides of the ancestry. Furthermore, the process would have to begin at a very early age, and would be quite painful at times, especially when initially unlocking the ability. That much, Orochimaru had been sure of. Naruto would have surely suffered greatly throughout the experience. "Wait, the Sharingan?" Tsunade suddenly asked, and dread pooled in her gut. "No way. No way do they know about." Jiraiya nodded at his teammate's expression. "Yes, it appears that Naruto has Uchiha DNA. I'm told that there is a conversation regarding this that you would remember." He trailed off, staring at his teammate meaningfully. And she did remember. Remember being approached by her grandmother, aged terribly due to the influence of the seal that allowed her to heal at a rate fast enough that an adult could survive pulling a Biju into themselves. A seal that Tsunade eventually refined into what was now her Byakugo no In, strength of 100 seal, and to the point where she had little time to live, and being asked to run a DNA comparison on Mito and Kushina. And the results had totally taken her by surprise. Yes, Tsunade finally admitted, sighing before her eyes narrowed. How did you know that? Jiraiya sighed in turn, placing his hands behind his head as he leaned back in his seat. It seems that a form of echo of Kushina and your grandmother remained with the Kyuubi after its extraction. He paused here momentarily, expecting a loud gasp from Shizune, but receiving none. He internally snorted. Figures. Tsunade tells Shizune nearly everything. It's no surprise she knows that Kushina and Mito were Jinchuriki. Shaking his head, he continued. The Kyuubi also pulled those presences forward to aid in the modification of Naruto's body. In effect, he has all of Mito and Kushina's skills and memories. Tsunade stared at her ex-teammate wide-eyed, barely noticing her own arm patting her apprentice on the back as the younger woman choked on oxygen. Kushina-chan's, Mito Bashin's, dear word. It made sense, as to how Naruto gained the Kusari. And of course, after the DNA test Tsunade and her grandmother had conducted, it was decided to seal any potential for the Sharingan away from Kushina's body. She had to admit, she still didn't know who her grandmother's mystery lover was, but the fact that his genes emerged in his descendant had to mean he had powerful chakra, even for an Uchiha. Otherwise, the DNA would have been overpowered by the Uzumaki clan's notoriously potent chakra, which would have also increased in potency with these events. There had been incidents of memory integration problems happening before that she had dealt with, so she knew why she had been called. Both Tsunade and her mother had been legendary, even when the former was young, for participating in Mito's efforts to assist Yamanaka clan members who had not integrated memories properly. A seal had been devised by Mito to effectively contain and seal the memories of past mind-walking experiences that featured memories that were entirely too dangerous to remain in a shinobi's mind. Secret intelligence, incidences of rape or torture, such things left a scar on the soul, and even bearing witness would affect someone, and not for the better. Although the seal had fallen out of fashion after the Yamanaka found a new way of doing this themselves, it remained a powerful technique that only Tsunade was versed in. A technique to seal away, either for integration or removal, and heal memory-related mental trauma. And it wasn't just the memories of anyone, but of Mito Ba and Kushina. Kushina, who had been somewhere in between a cousin and daughter to Tsunade. Kushina, who died to protect those she loved. Kushina, who named her Tsunade, godmother of her only child. Kushina, whose son was currently comatose because of the machinations of some meddling fox that had been ruining the lives of Tsunade's family for years. It and its blasted kindred. She need not hear anything else, for now. She had questions, sure, and she most definitely wanted answers. But those could be sorted once they arrived. Well then, Tsunade said at length, and then sighed. I suppose we're going to Konoha. Jiraiya blinked. Then, he grinned. Naruto experienced another memory from Kushina's perspective. Kushina dodged to the left swiftly, raising her sword in her arm and cleanly cleaving the Kiri nin's arm off. Forming two chains from her back, they struck forth and impaled two targets around her, both Kirigakure Jonin. Spinning, in a unique move inspired by her old Hyuga clan teammate, forming another two Kongo Fusa and enforcing them with Kaden-natured chakra, she cleanly beheaded one Kiri nin and gravely wounded another four who were within range of her attack. Hey, never underestimate me, Kiri scum. As always, a vindictive glee burned inside her at the mere thought of killing Kirigakure shinobi. Who knows, maybe there were even people who had taken place in Uzushio's fall amongst those present. She could continue her vengeance on those who slaughtered her kindred. Maybe there were even defectors from the Roku no Hagakoku, Protectorate of Six, present. Suddenly, a shadow passed above her, and Kushina dodged to the right just as the blade Shibuki, splash, came down on her position, an explosion rocking the area she had occupied not a second prior. Her Anbu mask shattered, and Kushina ducked her head swiftly downwards to prevent any debris from impacting her face. As it stood, she received several scratches along her face that would likely heal in a day or so. God, I love being an Uzumaki Jinchuriki, sometimes. Across from her, Munashi Jinpachi grinned lecherously. It'll be a great shame to kill such a beautiful specimen. Pity Mizukage-sama only wants your head, Kusari Taikiyatsu, chain cyclone, the man said, his bloodlust filling the air around him. Instead of responding, Kushina leapt at the man, bringing her blade down in a Kaden-empowered arc. In turn, the Kiri nin dodged slightly to the right, just as he brought his blade up to parry the attack. The groaning, scraping noise Shibuki made upon taking the impact, however, was not promising. Neither was the dent revealed at the impact point. Jinpachi practically foamed at the mouth. "You bitch," he shouted, spinning Shibuki and deploying the plethora of explosive tags on the blade, all of which ignited in a grand explosion that sent Kushina, who had formed a Cage Bunshin shadow clone, at the last minute to throw her away, flying. Recovering quickly, she leapt back to meet him, forming a Kongo Fusa and attempting to impale him. Her attempts failed, however, as he dodged each attack of the chain nimbly, and eventually it became so distant from her that she had to release the technique. Racing towards him again and swinging her sword to strike, Kushina was forced to dodge as Jinpachi let loose a sweeten Mizurapa, water release. Water trumpet, in hopes of catching her head on. Kushina rounded around the technique and swung her blade at the A-ranked shinobi. Remembering the damage inflicted to his Shibuki last time, he dodged instead of parrying. The two Kenjutsu users continued their dance for several minutes, trading ninjutsu and blows. Jinpachi always made sure to dodge rather than parry where possible, but his blade still received some glancing blows from Kushina's superior katana. 3 dents lined the frame of the weapon, including one on the sharpened length of metal directly opposite to the reels of explosive tags. Kushina herself was not without wounds, sporting a plethora of bruises on her left side and a cut down her right arm. Similarly, Jinpachi's shins were bloodied from where he had strained against the kusari that Kushina had used to bind him at one point. All the surrounding shinobi fought their own battles, refraining from entering the struggle between the two powerful nin. "You know, I'm glad we finally got a look at you, stupid bitch." Jinpachi taunted, and Kushina fought to remind herself that this foul-mouthed imbecile was actually the Kirigakure no Nikuya, Butcher of the Hidden Mist, an incredibly dangerous A-ranked ninja. "We've spent so long trying to figure out what the fuck you look like, and finally here you are." That was understandable, really. After the incident with Kumo, the Sandame had placed Kushina under strict surveillance, preventing any information about her from leaving the village. Not long after she had reached Jonin rank, she had joined the Anbu, and become notorious as a masked figure on the battlefield, never showing her face. Of course, there were no other Uzumaki in Konoha barring herself, so the cover had its flaws, but with Jiraiya using his spy network to throttle any rumors leaving the village, Kushina's identity remained unknown, for the most part, outside of Konoha. Instead, she was Konoha no Kusari Taikiyatsu, chain cyclone of the leaf. "Well, I always knew to look out for your ugly mug, Nikuya," she mocked, and enjoyed the threatening growl she received in response. Jinpachi leapt at her, swinging Shibuki down sharp side first, in an effort to cleave her head in half. Kushina dodged nimbly, using her Kongo Fusa to pull her elsewhere. Twisting to the right as she moved, Kushina laid her hand against Jinpachi's side, intoning the name of her technique as she did so. Fuinjutsu. Chakra Baindo, Sealing Art. Chakra Bind. The sudden nature of the attack, coupled with the immediate lack of control of his chakra, stunned Jinpachi, and in that moment she struck. Kushina brought her blade around in a slash, not bothering to coat it with Kaden chakra since the natural poisons on the blade would be negated by that, and Jinpachi dodged as she expected, but not quickly enough. Kushina's blade connected with the left side of Jinpachi's face, cleaving a bloody swath across his skin where his eye once rested. As he cried out in pain, 2 Kiri nin dropped down and grabbed him by the shoulders. "You'll regret this, you and your kindred," Jinpachi snarled as he and his blade were carried away by his subordinates. Just as Kushina went to follow him and complete the job, however, another figure alighted the ground in front of her, wielding the blade Haramekure. A man with spiky red hair and cold black eyes, set in a pale, slim face. Uzumaki Kazuhiko, 1.5 weeks previously. Here is inside sadly, a new habit, as of late, as he stared at the amassed, bickering genin. Nara Shikamaru, heir to the Nara clan and a lazy genius, just like so many of his clansmen were. The boy was pretty much a younger clone of his father, barring a softening of his features courtesy of his genes from his mother, Yoshino. Pretty much a guaranteed success in his current escapade, and pretty much the only one, at that. Yamanaka Ino, heiress to the Yamanaka clan, and perhaps not the most serious kunoichi around, but with a peculiar passion for working with plants. As the daughter of Inoichi, she also likely had a predisposition towards T&I, but it was perhaps a tad early to be considering that as a future for her yet. She was also one of the more risky of his gambles, but one that could pay off well if addressed correctly. Akamichi Choji, heir to the Akamichi clan, and perhaps the very embodiment of the clan's eating habits. The boy had significant self-esteem issues, but had inherited the incredible kindness of his predecessors. He was one of the few in the academy that had been at least somewhat friendly with Naruto, and as such would likely prove to be one of the safest gambles of the group. Inuzuka Kiba, a rather brash boy, not unlike Naruto barring the presence of clan training and a loving family. Definitely not amongst the most intelligent, but one of the closest things to a friend Naruto had been able to gain in the academy. Of course, as a shinobi of the Inuzuka clan, he was unfailingly loyal, and he personally would grow to be reasonably influential within the clan, as the clan head's only nephew. He was another risk, and perhaps not the most worthwhile one, either. But regardless, he was one of the next generation, and thus necessary. Hyuga Hinata, heiress to the Hyuga clan, and perhaps their greatest hope. Or at least, the hope of the branch family. Possessing a rare kindness and empathy in a clan where such things were considered practically heretical, especially by her own parents and grandparents, Hinata was incredibly timid and shy. He had heard the whisperings within the clan, of course. Rumor had it that only Hiashi's rapidly declining goodwill was preventing the girl from being branded with the Hyuga Soke no Juinjutsu, Hyuga main family's Juinjutsu. She held a fondness for Naruto, which hopefully meant she would be one of the safer gambles amongst the amassed genin, although Sarutobi couldn't be sure. Aburame Shino, son of the representative to the Aburame Ju, although there was no obvious indication that he possessed the same level of talent as his father. A quiet, stoic individual, much like the rest of his clan, Shino was likely to prove little obstacle in this endeavor, due to his nigh-infallible logic. Haruno Sakura, a young kunoichi who, while possessing rather small chakra reserves, also had perhaps the greatest chakra control seen in the village since Tsunade herself. She was exactly in the middle of her academy class, being highly skilled in mental components but lacking in the physical. She could be a dangerous medic nin and genjutsu user, when she was older, as long as she was trained properly. She was also one of the greatest risks in the group, but also one of the highest paying ones, should he succeed. Uchiha Sasuke, the supposed last loyal Uchiha, the most powerful of his class in regards to sheer chakra and jutsu. While the boy's father had been in the process of arranging to have the raven-haired preteen graduate the academy early when the man died, the Sandame had been forced to place such plans on the side for a time, after it became clear that the young Uchiha's mental state was not what it once was. Sasuke was one of the least risky of his planned gambles, surprisingly, because of his relation to the blonde, albeit distantly. Sarutobi sighed. He was playing politics with children. What was the world coming to? In the tree line, Hiruzen could detect the chakra of the three teams' respective sensei, Yuhi Kurenai, Hitaki Kakashi and his own son, Asuma. For the most part, they weren't much of a gamble, although the Hokage was aware that the latter and especially the former of the three generally did not approve of the village Jinchuriki. After all, Asuma was quite smitten with Kurenai, and the kunoichi was disinclined to have anything to do with the blonde, especially since the last member of her family, her brother Arashi, had been publicly executed for an attack on the blonde, in broad daylight. And it would have ended much worse than it did, too, if not for the timely intervention of his old friend Kagami's descendant. Using a simple shunshin, body flicker, to appear before the amassed genin, the Sandame smiled slightly at the sight of them all. They shall be great. Hokage-sama, Sakura exclaimed, rising to her feet and bowing to the man, followed shortly afterwards by the rest of the next generation. Ah, Sakura-chan, the man replied lightly, and the girl blushed at being under the legendary shinobi's scrutiny. You may be at ease, he continued, addressing the group at large, and they slowly, carefully, did so. Regardless, a minute stirring lay within their young forms now, and Hiruzen smothered his smile's attempts to grow into a flat-out grin. Great indeed. I have called you all here today to discuss the missing member of your graduating class. Oh, that's right. The exuberant Inuzuka interrupted, his eyes alight with sudden epiphany as he scanned the surrounding area for signs of the missing blonde. Dodging the Yamanaka's swipe at the back of his head as she grumbled about troublesome, disrespectful mutts, followed by horrified mutters about turning into Shika, the brunette continued. Where is that baka, anyway? Sleeping in, I guess, he claimed haughtily, completely missing the glares that the aforementioned Jinchuriki's teammates were giving him. Naruto is in a coma, Hiruzen interjected, quickly stemming the flow of mutterings from amongst the genin. Again, all attention was on him, although all those present seemed to be somewhat caught up in their own shock. Continuing on, the shinobi no Kami prayed that his gamble would pay off. Team 7 was sent on a mission that was incorrectly ranked. Throughout the mission, Naruto was influenced and has fallen into a coma. Currently, his godmother is being called back to the village so that he can be treated. Anyo, Hokage-sama, the soft-spoken Hyuga heiress asked, looking up from beneath blue-black bangs to gaze at the man questioningly. At his nod, she amassed her courage and continued. I though thought Naruto-kun grew up alone, Hokage-sama, so. Why did his godmother not return sooner? To raise him? She asked simply, and it was a question Hiruzen didn't like the answer to. He grimaced, the lines around his face deepening as the preteens all suddenly gazed at their leader in interest. Naruto-kun's godmother lost much throughout her life, as did his godfather, he replied, genuine sadness coating his words. I think the loss of Naruto's parents was what finally drove them off the edge. They had both lost very much, especially during the previous shinobi world wars, and to lose those two as well. I think they couldn't deal with the reminder. Not entirely true. He doubted Tsunade was even aware of Naruto's continued existence. He had never been able to bring himself to contact her again, not when she had so willingly abandoned the village. Doubly so, since she was scant meters from the gates when she turned around and left again. He had long felt that Naruto deserved better than to have such a dysfunctional pair of guardians. And, admittedly, a small part of it was the need for the village's Jinchuriki to remain entirely local and loyal. Tsunade's rebellious streak may very well have shaped him into something utterly unreliable. That's cowardly, the Yamanaka heiress interjected suddenly, and all attention was drawn to her. She didn't seem to notice, as she was staring resolutely at her leader. It's hardly fair to anyone to ignore them, simply because they bring up bad memories. Especially a child left in your care. The blonde was steadily growing more heated in her arguing, and Hiruzen was almost willing to say he already had her. Now for the others. Indeed it is, he agreed easily, although it was understandable, too. All of his students had lost most of their close family and friends. He often wondered, actually, what would have happened if he or someone else had better filled the void in Orochimaru's life, after the loss of his parents. But regardless, it is how it is. What I need to speak to you all about is something slightly different. At the raised hand of Nara Shikamaru, Sarutobi nodded slightly, already having an idea as to what the boy would ask. Hokage-sama, you mentioned that Naruto was influenced? He inquired, and the eyes of the other genin widened, realizing the vital information that they had missed. Well, bar Shibi's son. The Sandame suspected that the boy simply hadn't gotten around to mentioning it yet. Hiruzen nodded, humming softly before forming a hand seal. Beside him, a cage bunchin materialized. Immediately, Hiruzen removed a scroll from his robes. What is this? He asked simply, and knew even without checking that the first hand to rise belonged to the Haruno girl. Yes, Sakura-chan? That's a scroll, Hokage-sama, she said, gesturing at the object. In general, they're used as simple storage devices, but skilled fuinjutsu users are capable of using them for other things, such as sealing chakra or placing summoning matrices on them. That's correct, Sakura-chan, he responded, directing the bunchin to begin the demonstration. Both stepping to the side a little, the bunchin unleashed a Kaden, Karyu Enden, fire release. Fire Dragon Bullet, at the original. Ignoring the gasps of the genin at the high-level technique, Sarutobi opened the scroll and made a single hand seal. The attack was absorbed into the readily prepared scroll neatly, entirely vanishing just as the Bunshin dispersed. Walking back over to the Genin, he held up the scroll, making sure to allow them to see the sealing matrix placed on its surface. And now? He questioned simply, eyes scanning the amassed preteens, gauging their reactions. A scroll with a Kaiden ninjutsu sealed inside of it. Hokage-sama, the Aburame boy replied. Hiruzen almost frowned, but instead settled for raising an eyebrow. And does that make it any less of a scroll, Shino-kun? The Sandame questioned. Of course not, Hokage-sama, Shino replied, nodding his head in capitulation. Why? Because being a scroll is inherent to its nature, and cannot be changed, regardless of the strength of that contained within. Hiruzen grinned triumphantly, internally, of course. Although, the Aburame added, seemingly contemplative for a fleeting moment. It does increase the scroll's potential for battle, but besides that, it changes nothing. Hiruzen frowned as he prepared to drop his next bombshell, considering again his gamble. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. What? He trailed off, meeting eyes with all of the next generation present, if the same could be said of people.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.